order. My name is John McGlennon. I chair the TSDAC and represent Virginia's Association of Counties. I'm James City County Board of Supervisors Chairman. And I'll ask the other members of TSDAC to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Cindy Melster with the City of Falls Church City Manager's Office. And I am Vice Chair and represent Virginia Municipal League.
Good morning, Kate Mattice. I'm with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'm representing the Virginia Transit Association.
Good morning, Noelle Pinkford with Hampton Roads Transit, and I also represent the Virginia Transit Association.
Good morning, Paula Meester with the Central Shenandoah Planning District and Bright Transit, and I represent DRPT.
Good morning, Brian Booth with the Town of Blacksburg Transit, and I represent CTAB.
And I'd introduce the director.
Thank you. Maria Zimmerman, the Director of DRPT.
Alan Fye, Deputy Director at DRPT.
Zach Trogdon, Chief of Public Transportation, DRPT.
Dan Sonneclark, DRPT staff.
Tiffany Dubinsky, DRPT.
Good morning, I'm Evan Tooten. I'm a statewide transit planner here at DRPT.
And Grant Sparks, Director of Statewide Transit Programs for DRPT.
And then Dr. Smoot.
Dr. Smoot, would you mind introducing yourself? Well, Dr. Smoot is I know, attending virtually and represents the Transportation Board on today. So we have a lot to accomplish today and want to make sure that we're hearing fully from everyone involved in the important decisions ahead here. I think we have an agenda that is really organized around the idea of achieving some agreements and making clear where we stand on some of the issues confronting us before we move on to some of the issues that are still being worked on. Go ahead with the agenda today. We start with the safety briefing. Alan, so that's your.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. You are at Virginia DRPT's headquarters here in Richmond. We're at 600 East Main Street on the 21st floor. Just for folks here, if you need to use the restroom, you exit out the front door. Women's restrooms is to the left, gentlemen's to the right. We do have multiple first aid supplies in case there is an emergency while we have the meeting. And we also have multiple emergency defibrillators throughout the office in case we need to take advantage of one of those. I do believe we have some staff on DRPT that are certified to use AED defibrillators in case we have to do that. In the case that we need to have an evacuation for the building, do not use the elevators. We will make sure the DRPT staff direct you on down several different elevators to exit the building safely. We have two different elevators. One is by the men's restrooms and one is right immediately to the right of the door where you came in. Again, follow DRPT staff. We will convene a couple blocks away at the intersection of 6th and Gray Street in the parking lot there, and we'll make sure that folks guide you along the way just in case we do have the emergency. It looks like we have good weather today, so hopefully nothing crazy happens. There are drills scheduled for today, so we'll hopefully go a little bit smoother than last time. If there is a weather emergency, we need shelter in place or other types of emergency shelter in place, we will give you where to do that safely within DRPT's offices. So any questions on the safety protocols? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have a set of minutes from March 10th. Does anyone have any amendments or corrections to the minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion to approve. All in favor, please signify by the sign of aye.
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 Any opposed? Was that a yes, Dr. Smoot?
I heard an aye.
Great. Okay. The minutes will stand approved then. We're now going to go on to comments from the director.
Great. Well, as always, thank you everyone for your service on TSDAC. I know that you are busy folks with a lot going on, and so we really appreciate your volunteering to be part of this effort and to provide your time and expertise and insights. I know many of you are representing additional constituencies beyond the own organization that you sit at, and so thank you again for, I know, the outreach that you do to come prepared to meetings and the conversations that happen after them. We have a very full agenda here today, as noted. And part of what we're going to be talking about as well is additional outreach that's going to happen after this meeting with some specific transit agencies, operators, to really kind of continue to workshop this cohort concept. We have a very robust timeline that we're all working to meet. And so I know we heard last time, Cindy and others, of we want to work at a quick pace. That means we really need to dig in, but again, continuing to get feedback between meetings so that our hope is we can start to get, I know everyone's very interested in what are the actual numbers to my agencies and what does that look like? But to the extent we can continue to focus on the policy discussions and really making sure we're making sound policy discussions, we'll know there'll always be some folks who may benefit from change, other folks who may be negatively impacted from change. But again, we're trying to create a process that, as we've been hearing over and over from folks through the outreach that has happened, not just this year, but last year as well, and really building up the last year's work. This is something DRPT as a state agency, we'd really like to have a more predictable, stable, consistent way to be providing these formula dollars so that transit agencies can do a better job of programming out and having more a complete sense of, kind of what's that baseline number that they could expect from the state, hopefully making those investments and doing activities and actions that will increase performance. And again, looking at ways to really reward that. So just wanted to, again, there was some question around what are our priorities. Our priorities truly is to have something that is more predictable. And that we want to, in doing this, think about the tailored policy objectives. Performance is really something we value as we think about that. It really is, are we doing things that will be increasing ridership, improving the customer experience, providing operational efficiencies, and again, helping transit agencies to grow revenues, and for us as a state to make sure we're providing safe, reliable, affordable transit to as many Virginians as we possibly can with these funds. So we recognize, again, the goals around tailored objectives. We talked a lot about that last time. We're going to talk about it more this time, really, as we think about the sizing metrics, but understanding, again, there are differences in terms of if you're a rural provider versus operating in a very dense, higher cost of living urban area. And so how can we sort of tailor some of our objectives around that? And we want something that can be more simple and transparent, again, in terms of for agencies, what are activities that they can do to help them see that boost, and knowing that sometimes tough things happen. A hurricane might happen. You might have a contract renegotiation. You might have other unique situations in your community. And so again, being simple and transparent of like, we're here to support you when that does happen, and you don't have to wonder, what's going to happen to my funding in these situations. So just wanted to kind of reiterate those goals for us with this. And I will turn it back to you so we can get into the good discussion.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very clear from the meetings we've had so far that you are really very sensitive to the idea that if we're talking about some change in the way in which we're going to categorize transit systems, and we're also talking about striving for predictability so that planning can go forward to the agencies. So that's very much appreciated. So thanks very much. Now, Alan, you've got your crystal ball out to tell us how the budget's going to turn out, as I understand it, and legislative action that is taking place.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very, very brief on this because not a lot has happened. And directly related to this group, something has happened. The governor did sign on April 6 HB 200 legislation that basically changes up the TRIP program. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. But that's gone through. We'll talk about over the next couple of months about the policy decisions and definitions and things we need your advice on as we move forward with that. No budget yet. I think it's one that everybody's really waiting for to see what happens. I believe reconvene is still for April 23rd. So we'll see where things come there. It's been very, very not directly related to TSDAC, but the labor bills that are out there. There was a recommendation from the governor to the House that was posted yesterday on LIS based on very, very minor changes. That's the only thing update there on the labor side of things that's been proposed. We'll wait and see what happens with that. We are tracking that because the RPT has a role in that as well. So with no crystal ball, Mr. Chair, I apologize not having one and being able to predict what's going to happen down the street. I'll turn it back over to you.
We'll say that, as if there were reports yesterday that, in fact, revenue was holding up well in the Commonwealth. So that's a good sign. Maybe we'll have some opportunities to see transit more fully funded. All right. So with that in place, we'll now just move on to Alan again with a recap.
All right. If you want to go to the next slide, Grant. Just wanted to recap kind of where we are in the big picture of the next several months. So you've seen this slide. We're going to keep showing it to you over and over again as we move forward and make progress on the different elements. Obviously, today we're going to talk about finalizing the cohort concept and introduce the concept about the sizing metric and a little bit of a sneak peek actually on policy decision number 3 as well. So you can see we're going to cover that today, and you're going to get a briefing from Evan, talk about the TRIP program, what happened, what changed, now that we know that that's been signed into law, and then mapping out over the next couple months. And this is a reminder about the fact that we do have a short runway to cover a lot of materials. So I'd echo what the director said. Thank you for your dedication and time and effort in this. Again, next slide. The timeline we have leading up until the October action by the CTB, looking at the merit and TRIP programs. We have a lot of work to do in between then, a lot of opportunities to hear from, obviously, TSDAC, but then also hear from all the different transit agencies across the state. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, but we have actually 4 working sessions already scheduled. We'll get dates and times later on. To talk to all the different cohorts, talk to the transit agencies, get your feedback on the first round, talking about policy decision number 2, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is that all-important weighting. And then we're anticipating that once we get through that and we get through the May meeting, having another round with all the cohorts as well, so we can keep refining that, making sure we're answering questions, being transparent about what we're trying to do, make sure folks are understanding. Again, we'll have a little bit of homework for folks to do at the actual workshops themselves, but also for TSDAC. So a lot of stuff moving along. We have some, we're planning, I think, a couple sessions at VTA. Danny Plower has offered to give us a couple slots there so we can have some facilitated time there as well to talk to folks who are able to attend. As we keep moving forward and work through these, obviously we'll be briefing our CTB members as well as we kind of get something, recommendations from DRPT and how to move forward and incorporating feedback from you all. And obviously going forward, we'll have a public comment period. We're going to make sure that the public comment period actually overlaps the September CTB meeting. So making sure that we're getting public comment, stakeholder comment, feedback from the CTB, then finalizing what that is before we go into October of action. We're going to make sure that whatever feedback we receive, we do share with the CTB by October when they make that final decision. And that leads directly into, right after that, opening the time period for applications for FY28. So a lot of material to cover, a lot of things to do over the next couple months. So if you want to go forward the next slide, I think this I don't necessarily need to talk through it all again, but I think this kind of reinforces the messaging that we've had in talking about what we heard from you all in 2025, what we heard from you so far this year, and continue and moving forward with this cohorting concept. We'll have a couple more discussion about what that looks like going forward, and then moving on from there. So I believe that is it for me, Mr. Chair.
Just a question getting back to the schedule. And this is something we faced a little bit last year. The public comment period, awesome, great type of public comment period. Will we have enough information going into June and July for those boards, those folks who need to have board approval for providing comments? Many of those don't meet.
Okay.
Actually, most of them do not meet in August. Some may meet in July.
Okay.
So will there be adequate information? Maybe I'm pressing that there is adequate information going into June.
Thank you.
So that my localities who don't have a late July, August board can provide comments during that period.
Thank you. That is a good request. And
Yeah.
thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
I know as we keep moving forward with these discussions and decisions, our goal is to, if we get some policy decisions 1 and 2, That helps us with the numbers. That helps us with a lot of the other things that we're going forward with. The goal will be to make sure that we can provide you with enough information they can go in making recommendations and comments going forward. So thank you for that
I'm just
reminder.
going to step in to say, yes, DRPT, let's work to do that. So we will get.
It's really important. It's really
That's
hard. We've had this challenge before. And look, we've seen that at the federal side where they ask for comments in a period where literally local governments aren't meeting and formal comments can't be given. And so formal comments in August
Yeah.
will have to be based basically on whatever's been presented in June, just for people's timeline and getting it briefed up. Yeah.
Because I think our hope, again, staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but as we've been walking through this, today we're going to be hopefully getting consensus around the cohort model as kind of policy consensus around that. We're going to be discussing the sizing metrics so that in May, we will hopefully get consensus around the sizing metrics and those elements. We will talk about the performance and stabilization piece and how that will work so that we can start to have those numbers for you all. I think in June, it should work into that sequencing, Kate, that you're asking for. So we will just.
It's really important. It's one of those things I think is kind of lost in scheduling is that many bodies don't meet during July, August. And then they have no authority to provide those comments.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just real quick while we're talking about public comments, did want to quickly mention that we did create a form on our DRPT website. It's under the TSDAC page for anyone to submit public comments. So that's live right now. You can see the hyperlink here at the bottom. And then also when we're doing these engagements and talking to our agencies and stakeholders, I've been creating a public comment or feedback database. And so I can share that whenever TSDAC wants to see it. I'm trying to get as much detail in there as possible. We're getting a lot of feedback, and we're going to talk about some of that feedback here in a little bit, but just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Brandon. So sorry to point this out. It looks like the slides are not advancing once again. Can somebody on the phone confirm?
We still see the outreach schedule.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
thank
says
you.
outreach.
I will send them another note.
We can try to share the presentation from our computer.
We could, yeah.
Do we have the presentation posted at
Yes.
all online?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay.
So, Mr. Chair,
I was going to say, so if it's posted online at a minimum while we're working this out, folks could open up that deck if they're able to access that, and we can just let you know what slide number we're on. So right now we are looking at slide number 13. And I will inform the IT folks again. So hopefully this will enable people who are virtual to follow along.
TSDAC members received it via email, so that should make it easier for Dr. Smoot.
so folks, pull up the presentation online. It's on the website. We'll drop the link into the chat, and we're going to start in a moment. If Mr. Chair, we're ready to move on to TRIP. And then Evan, just make sure you identify what slide you're on as we move forward.
Okay. All right. As we get started again, or
I think you can go ahead and have.
Keep going on here while so we can see in the room.
I'm scared to move up to the thing in case we have audio issues.
Just speak loudly.
Can people online hear me just to confirm?
Yes.
I can't see the slide.
Good morning again. My name is Evan Tuden. I'm a statewide transit planner here to talk about TRIP, the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. As Alan mentioned, we have some exciting legislative changes that just passed. It involved TSDAC, so I'm here to just quickly review the program for later today. So TRIP was established in 2020. It's 6% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. It's about $30 million each year. It was initially limited to promoting improved transit service in urbanized areas of the Commonwealth and also reducing barriers to transit use for low-income individuals. And in 2022 and 2023, there were some revisions to the program. Passenger facilities and public safety projects were added. And then there were some administrative changes about spending floors and ceilings rules for the project categories. And then earlier this year, HB 200 passed. This simplified program requirements, speak up, routes of regional significance. The urban restriction was removed for that. It also added a new project category, approaches to micromobility, paratransit, and specialized transportation. And it also sets TSDAC to support DRP, support CTP in developing program guidelines. So in developing program guidelines.
Real quick, slide 16, just try to say
Oh,
when
yeah,
you're
yeah.
advancing the slide, just so folks.
Slide 16. On slide 16, we're operating with 3 levels of policy. Also, if you're online in the PDF, you should be able to click on each of the images to see the full policy. So the Code of Virginia informs CTP policy, which then informs our grant guideline. So notes in the book. Slide 17, for today, I'll quickly review how the program exists as it is currently. Slide 18, there's 4 project categories currently: regional connectivity, zero and reduced fare, passenger amenities, and public safety projects. On the next slide, slide 19, delving more into regional connectivity. Currently, this is only eligible in metro areas with more than 100,000 population. This includes improving or expanding routes with regional significance, such as Brightbus's Afton Express, which connects Stanton and Charlottesville, HRT's Newport News Microtransit Zone, which connects a large portion of the city to their fixed route transit. This is also eligible for developing regionally integrated fare collection systems and subsidy allocation models. On to slide 20, next, zero and reduced fare. This covers fare passes for low populations, eliminating fares on high capacity corridors, fare policy planning, and then eliminating fares system-wide, such as with GRTC and Mountain Links Transit District 3. Slide 21, passenger amenities, which was added in 2022. Bus shelters, bus stops, new law. Next. Slide 22, public safety. This covers safety equipment, safety programming, such as GRTC's contracted safety officers, and safety planning. Equipment example is GRT's onboard surveillance camera upgrades.
Just a question, get back, because on the fair in particular, just help us sort of understand, because then we're kind of getting more up to speed on the program.
Mitch.
Is that, when somebody applies for a grant for fair, is that in perpetuity? I know there's some guidelines. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to apply for some of these programs in terms of whether they're step down or whether they're, how, that makes sense.
Yes, this is essentially divided into zero fare and reduced fare. So this system-wide zero fare projects, there's a 5-year step down.
Okay.
The state match decreases each year.
Okay.
And there's a required final year where the system has to operate fare-free without the additional state subsidy.
Okay.
Reduced fare passes they have a different step down system. It's 3 years, slightly different, and it doesn't have that final year.
And is that in code or is that DRPT policy?
That's DRPT. Or I believe it's CTP, yeah.
CTP policy.
It's a mix of both.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
So you said for the reduced and free fare, it's 5-year, comes down every year, and then 1 year without state assistance, then they can reapply?
No.
Okay, that's it.
One and done.
And we did have an issue. Some agencies had reapplied for funding this year, and so they weren't eligible to be funded because we had already previously funded them through this program.
Any other questions?
So this is an exciting time to configure this whole program. Safety. Okay, now I'm on slide 23 for everyone online. Advancing to slide 24, which shows the language in HB 200, which was recently approved. This is the bulk of the new legislation. The project categories were condensed into a single section, and it says CTP shall establish guidelines in conjunction with TSDAC, review every 3 years. The new concept that was added in this legislation is encouraging innovative approaches to micromobility, paratransit, and specialized transportation. This is a new concept for the program. So Over the course of the summer, we're going to prepare a policy proposal for CTV with you all through the feedback, peer exchanges, VT sessions, as Alan mentioned. So at the next meeting, I believe we'll have a policy proposal to review. Next steps, I have some specific questions, but they're built in with grant slides in combination with the merit review. It's pretty simple, but does anyone have follow-up questions right now?
Just really quick. So Kate, your question before about the multi-year fair, or was it?
So I'm going to step back a second. Some folks are really, really familiar with this program. A lot of folks aren't. I'm trying to get a very basic level of sort of what's in the program. The slides are really helpful. And so part of it is like we're running through what I think it's important to understand the baseline of the program and what it is. So that's really what I'm trying to make sure that everybody understands what we're working with. That's eligibility that's not changing. And so that's like, I just know there's something about Fair Free. Like I've never played in the TRIP program, but I know people use it. So I think it's really important for people to understand how do you use it, what are the eligibilities, et cetera, likewise with the other parts of the program. So
I wanted to confirm that with for the regional connectivity, that is the 5-year step down period. And then Zero Fair is 3 years maximum with an additional 4th year. So there are different years that are involved with regional connectivity as well as Zero Fair. And then for the other two that were mentioned that were capital focused, those are not multi-year typically. Those are usually about a 1-year capital project. Okay. Yes.
Yes, so to confirm, HB 200 maintains the projects that were eligible, adds more potential projects, more areas, correct?
Yes. So what you'll see, so what you'll see is that in the next steps, we are going to focus on what's required of HB 200, but we do provide the opportunity for TSDAC to be able to provide comments if there's suggestions or modifications to the existing project categories. So this is the first time I think we have actively presented to TSDAC on how TRIP has been administered. Usually we'll give that as part of our draft SIP in terms of what we're doing with requests and rewards, but we are looking at doing some workshops, also get some feedback on how our existing agencies that have grants have been utilizing the program and kind of getting lessons learned as well.
One comment and one question. So I think with the HB 200, what I like about it is, as a new program, that it simplifies the code immensely. I'd like seeing it all in one slide. But I like Kate and your comment. I don't know anything about TRIP, so I want to be a value add to this process. So I appreciate this, but there may also be a little bit more education that's needed. So that's the comment. The question on slide 16. Evan, you mentioned that it's a hot link in the PDF. It's not in the PowerPoint, am I correct? I just tried it, it wasn't working. So I just want to know from a technical standpoint.
Try clicking CTRL and then click.
Okay. Thank you for the technical assistance, because I need to learn and have the link.
I think the 3 policies are very useful just to see that like waterfall sequence and develops a lot more detail as you get into our policy.
And we can maybe pull from this and sort of create a 2-pager or something for folks, kind of what the current way it flows out, and then really clearly like what's changed, what isn't, proposing changes, so we can have that. And I think we can, again, in our SIP outreach that will be happening in each of the 10 districts in April and May. We are also going to be using those to have information on TRIP and on the merit process to also get input from folks. And so this is probably a good thing for our team as we think about how we provide this, to provide a little bit more detail than we have in the slides here. So you sort of really have that clarity around eligibility and some of those cutoff dates and how that plays out.
So can I just ask how many agencies have taken advantage of TRIP?
What's the total number, Jack? I know it's.
Yeah, we had, there were geographic, some restrictions before, and regional connectivity could only go to certain folks. So the rural agencies were the only ones. So I would say probably out of, rural agencies really couldn't use it, if I'm not mistaken, at the time.
They couldn't use the regional connectivity.
So regional connectivity applied to some.
zero fare applied to everyone. In the past for amenities, it just came along, and the public safety just kind of came along last governor, so we're still.
We do have not insignificant carryover in the trip account because it has been undersubscribed. We have been able, as you heard, some of those things like bus shelters, bus stops, amenities, and even some of the safety improvements, we have been able to meet some of the requests that have come in for Merit Capital, where we've been able to fund those with TRIP because they are the types of capital things that TRIP is eligible to fund if that meets up. And so having that flexibility of kind of a relief valve, if you will, on the Merit Capital side, I think has been helpful. And I think that's where we've seen significant funding and applications kind of within that category. The safety category, as you heard, has only been there for a couple of years. So there's been a few programs in that again, but we've kind of had some of that flexibility. I think we've seen with the zero fare and the reduced fare, staff correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of been tampering down as those larger, GRTC, some of the folks that kind of came in early, Charlottesville and others, they couldn't come back to reapply. That is a program, though, there's not a population threshold for that. So it could be something for rural and smaller agencies to think about, where we know we've heard sometimes the cost of fare collection is more, less juice than the squeeze is worth. So that is something that we've been thinking about just as part of the governor's focus around affordability are there opportunities for some of those smaller agencies and rural places where transit really is a vital lifeline to get to the doctor, to get to the hospital. There might be some outreach we could do on that. And then the regional connectivity, we've had some projects with that, but again, the limitations with that made it not the appropriate sort of spot of funding for some folks that might be looking at those types of regional connectivity things. So it is freeing up some of those limitations, but it is adding these new additional eligibilities around paratransit and micromobility and such. So.
And Chair, if I could, I like the idea of the one-pager fact sheet. I mean, that helped with our operating when we message out. This one will need to be the 2-page at least that you just talked about. But as you were talking in the chair's question, it also would be helpful, maybe it's not for the wider education, but for us, like, what is the pots of money? What has been used? What hasn't been used? And as you talked about the crossover for Merit Capital, that I'm like, oh yeah, there was a slide a couple months back where we showed that.
Yeah.
So we probably need to refresh the brain cells here. So there may be 2 resource documents to help us.
Yeah, and we'll have the new SIP the draft SIP coming out in April, so we can have some real examples of this is how that kind of crossover worked. Here's some of those things.
So as I said, I think Cindy's really pointing out, I mean, this body has not touched TRIP.
Right.
So give us some grace. And some agencies may have, but only 5% versus another. So just recognize that we have a learning curve in this space. I think the other thing that though it does highlight to me, which I think is a wonderful opportunity for DRPT moving forward, is actually having some way to say, if you have this type of project, these are the places you can look to get money. Because the undersubscription to me and then the moving of money shows that I'm not sure localities knew or transit systems knew which place to apply, or they may have been confused, right? And so there's an opportunity as these gets new shape and program is like, oh, if you're a bus stop, here's the 2 different programs that you can apply for. I mean,
and we have it set up so there's flexibility. Like you come in one door and we can move you to the end. So it wasn't, if you didn't apply to TRIP, you weren't penalized, we could move you over there. But yeah, and I think the fact that the goalpost kind of was changing each year, each year there was adjustments made to the program. So I think there is a lot of confusion around TRIP. I think we do like that, it's focusing on some things that, again, I think can be policy priorities for us. And it does that also provide that flexibility. So yeah, Grace, absolutely. I think there's just been a lot of.
If I could, before Grant jumps in on the fact sheet, what you were just saying, what would also be helpful for me is to know Evan's point earlier, what is code, what is CTV, and what is DRPT? Because that way, then we have some value add if we help. Just thank you for letting me jump back in first.
Sure. So just getting to the under subscription of the program, There's some context here that I think is very important to TSDAC. When TRIP was created back in 2020, omnibus bill, right before COVID.
I was gonna say March 20th.
Literally like a month or two before COVID.
Yeah, like.
The idea was like regional connectivity, I think, was the big one. It was like, at the time, folks were talking about, BRT, all these.
It was Route 7, yeah.
All these expansion projects. And so that's why that was created. And then there was a whole lot of talk in the industry about moving to zero fare transit. So those were the two original programs. But because of COVID, like it took a year once the GA, passed the bill, we didn't actually start TRIP I think we did a mid-cycle. So 6 months after, we were right in the heart of no transit agency wanted to do any expansion for regional connectivity. So that program just was dead right off the bat. And it gave us this giant carryover balance for the first couple of years of TRIP. But fast forward to today, Maria mentioned that some changes have been made. We now have this capital eligibility. And this is the piece that I think you guys really need to pay attention to, is we have dual eligibility now between TRIP and a bunch of our programs. And we have directed a lot of the needs that are traditionally from our other programs to TRIP. And so we have now kind of caught up on a year-to-year basis, but we have this carryover that we're just like slowly chipping away at. Kate, I don't know if you are aware of this, but Richmond Highway BRT, the construction funding for that is funded through TRIP, not capital.
Wow.
So some of these big ticket projects, we've actually been able to lean on TRIP because of the dual eligibility, which has helped preserve our capital funding. So there's all this kind of movement between programs because of the dual eligibility. I mean, you can do planning projects under TRIP as well. And then we have technical assistance, which you can do planning. So I don't want everybody to kind of think that, we have this giant amount of money and we don't get enough applications, because now we do. It's just we have this carryover that we're slowly chipping away at. So by stripping all these restrictions, I think it's generally a good thing. It gives us more flexibility. But I want you guys to kind of have the context that there are some major capital projects in TRIP right now. And then when Richmond Highway BRT comes online, that project's eligible for operating. And so these are huge projects that could eat away at the TRIP program funds. And we just need to be mindful of that as we're kind of developing policy changes.
Well, you just reinforced for me why I'm glad TRIP is now part of TSDAC. They give you all an extra workload to get us up to speed and coordinate it, but it makes so much sense to see these holistically and not little pockets, because you guys are administrating them holistically.
Right.
We're trying to, and so now we can probably be a value add.
Any other questions?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Matt, you're up now. I think.
All right. Okay. Yes. Folks online, we are moving to slide 27. Okay. So TRIP, we are now pivoting to merit operating. And we've kind of broken today's content into three pieces, and it's three different policy decisions that need to be made. And so just to kind of start us off, we're flipping to slide 28 here. You all saw this graphic at the last meeting in March. We've slightly tweaked it, just adding a few graphics and some colors and everything for ADA compliance. Sure. And so really the first part of the conversation today is going to focus on that policy decision number one, which is revenue cohorting. So we've kind of broken down this policy decision number one into two kind of sub-policy decisions. It's policy decision 1A, which is what are our cohorts? We have to define what they are. And then once we have defined what they are, we then need to determine how much revenue goes to each cohort from the very top line merit operating revenues that we have. But this has been pretty much preserved since the last meeting, but we did get some comments where to start, so we could start here, star, and then change the colors, but everything else is remained. Okay, So I mentioned earlier that we have received a lot of feedback just since the last TSDAC meeting in March. So this is just a high level kind of summary of that feedback we received. There has been general consensus, and we are on slide 29, sorry. There has been general consensus that revenue cohorting is a step in the right direction. So folks do understand that we need to get away from this one size fits all approach. I don't think anybody has really pushed back on it. That being said, we have received a fair number of comments that there is interest in exploring alternative methods for revenues. So we talked last month about cohorting the revenues with rural, small urban, and large urban. So that's by area type. There have been some suggestions about cohorting possibly by mode, by the size of the agency, or other service characteristics. I do want to mention that cohorting by mode is the one that keeps coming up often. It is, however, something that is specific to our large urban agencies. Not surprisingly, they are the ones that offer different modes of service. Our small urban agencies and our rural agencies, they operate your traditional transit modes. So when you think of the large urban agencies, you got HRT, who has ferry, light rail. You got PRTC, who's got commuter bus. You got BRT here in Richmond. So that's where you see all the modal diversity is with our largest agencies. And so those are the ones that are making comments that are just interested in exploring modal cohorting. Okay. So wanted to just bring that up because that was a constant that we have heard from our largest agencies. Additional feedback, the proposed cohorts of rural, small urban, and large urban do include outlier agencies that have different service models and operational contexts. Specifically, what I mean by that is, I'll start with the large urban cohort. You have the city of Fairfax, which is a kind of a smaller agency in a big area with a lot of transit. You have Petersburg, who is large urban, who operate in the Richmond region, but they're much smaller than GRTC. And then Roanoke is also a large urban area as defined by the FTA. And Valley Metro, who operates the service in Roanoke, is pretty small. So those are the outliers in like the biggest cohort. But you have these outliers in literally every cohort. Small urban, you have some bigger agencies like Blacksburg, and then you also have some smaller agencies like Bristol and Winchester. So there's some differences there. And then even in the rural cohort, you have some large rural agencies and some like micro rural agencies. So wanted to point that out too. When looking at modal cohorting and just other ways of cohorting, every time we kind of look at the list, there are outliers regardless of how you do this. So just wanted to point that out though, that specifically with large urban, rural, and small urban, there are some outliers. So we got to work through those challenges.
I think one of the things that, and as Grant and the team knows, we've had a lot of conversations with the transit systems up in Northern Virginia. I think one thing that I found was getting confused was rural, small urban, and large urban systems.
Right.
You're really talking about
Geographies.
cohorts that have a geographic commonality. And I think it's really hard. People have a hard time separating the two of those. So when I think if we talk about geography, which I think I would argue in urban, large urban has actually a cost structure that is similar across all of those agencies. I recognize that the measures that will be used to allocate the money is another step, but the idea being, at least in terms of cost and the buckets of money, which I know you're going to get to soon, probably are best aligned with the costs of operating those systems and the characteristics. And so, I mean, I'm not saying like I'm all in. I've obviously heard a lot of concerns and questions. I do think a lot of those are things that will be addressed in the next step. But in our communication, people are combining the two because, as we know, you can be in a large urban environment and have a small system.
Right.
But the cost dynamics of being in a large urban system actually are similar. right? And so I'm kind of really saying that mostly for the audience to hear because it took me a little bit. I had that aha go off and I'm not sure others have. So how we communicate might be about regional geography, cost structure, something that gets away from system. Because if I get what you're getting at, you're actually not talking about larger gym systems. You're actually talking about larger areas.
Yes.
Okay, and so, yeah.
And to piggyback on that, there has also been some confusion, kind of a different type of confusion, because we have some rural agencies or systems that actually serve a small urban area because they bring people into the small urban area. And in their mind, they're thinking, well, we're small urban, we're taking people to the urbanized area. So we are using area type for the agency, which is a federal definition. So those rural agencies get Section 5311 funding, which is the rural federal formula funding, whereas the urban agencies get the urban federal formula funding. So,
But I think Kate's point is an important one, because what she's saying is we shouldn't say it's a.
System has that designation.
Yeah, they are within we are cohorting the state geographically, kind of by metropolitan size. So you could be a small agency that is within a large urban area.
yes.
You can be a small rural agency that is actually providing service within a small urban area. So I think you have an important insight here on kind of the nomenclature.
Yeah, the messaging is really confusing when
Yeah.
we keep going back to agency designation. Because actually we almost want, in this case, in this one step, it's not about the
You're
agency.
dividing the state into
Yeah,
these
they
regions.
happen to, that's where you're learning it from. But I think that if you almost step back, again, if you're going to use the federal model, metropolitan statistical areas or whatever, urbanized areas, it just happens to be that FTA is latched onto that census designation. So let's just use that census designation and not relate it to the type of transit system. I know I'm getting kind of.
And I think the point of like some of those cost issues, we see the similarities.
Well, that's where I see that there's real value in recognition is that the cost structure of operating transit, and a lot of this is about cost of running transit and having money to support the costs, are a lot more expensive in our urban areas. And I think that I would hate to see somebody lose money because they need to align with an urban cost structure, right? Okay.
So I think what I'm hearing here is that in our communications, we are cohorting by area. Like we're not talking about rural agencies, small urban agencies, large urban agencies. It's like we are giving money to the rural area. We are giving X dollars to the small urban areas combined, and X amount of money to the large urban areas combined.
Yes.
And there are agencies, we all know that there are agencies within those areas, but this top decision is money to different areas in Virginia. So that is a very good point, that we don't want to kind of confuse the two.
I like that because if you use the example of Fairfax County and Fairfax City does have the Northern Virginia cost structure.
And I don't want them to be penalized and put somewhere else, right? Yeah.
But you also, the smaller locality within that geographic area is also going to have a smaller economy of scale. So it still makes sense that they be aligned in the cost structure of the geography.
Yeah. And I think the devil's in step 2, and that's the next meeting. So like, I'm not trying to get.
We're going to get into that.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that moment.
So that's really good feedback, because again, we want this to be understandable and clear. So that's.
So help me just from a very personal perspective to understand why my transit system is a small urban.
WADA's within its own urbanized area, 50,000, over 50,000.
And that's
Between
based on.
50 and 199.99.
That's based on FTA.
Yeah,
That's the
no,
US
that's based on the
Census.
census. So FTA uses, WADA is above 50,000, but less than 200,000. So that's considered a small urban system. So, and I mean, it's about cost, as Kate was saying. It's also about, also ridership potential and stuff like that. Like Kate said, we'll get into the next thing about, but
We're
as
going to
well.
talk a lot about costs later.
Sort of how your potential as well.
Okay.
All right, so the last bullet point here on slide 29 is that kind of the common feedback that we've heard from everyone we've talked to is that predictability and stability are top of mind and are the primary concern. Over the years, we've seen a lot of fluctuation in allocations, and for planning and budgeting purposes, folks just want it to be way more predictable and stable. I think there was a conversation about that at the last meeting. We have this performance and stabilization or stability fund that we're going to be talking about at the end of today, and then more into the next meeting. But that is kind of the common feedback that we've received so far. Okay, so policy decision 1A. So just in terms of some key considerations here, again, policy decision 1A on slide 30 is how do we define the cohorts? So the purpose of cohorting is to identify those natural groupings where the Commonwealth can set customized goals and metrics. So again, we're talking about areas potentially as a method of cohorting. There will always be outliers regardless of how cohorts are defined. We talked about that on the last slide. Data availability does limit our options for how we define cohorts, specifically calling out operating cost by mode. That is not something that we have access to currently. We collect operating costs by agency. The agencies operate multiple modes of service in different areas. We do not have that level of granular detail. There are definitely ways to collect that data. In some of the outreach that we've had, our large urban agencies pointed out that they have to report that data to the federal government. And so they have that, but it gets really nuanced, like how do you split up admin costs between all the different nodes? We need to better understand how our agencies that do report that granular level of detail are doing that to the federal government. Do we want to use that definition or do we want to modify it? So there are a lot of questions that we would have to answer regarding getting that piece of data, operating cost by mode. I also want to put a quick plug in for the performance data study that we have started. That could be an opportunity where we look at those methods of data collection and getting a little bit more detailed operating costs from our agencies. But that is something that's going to be, the next year or so, it's going to have to take to complete. Additionally here, this is going to come up probably throughout the conversation today, is that DRPT provides operating funds in other programs as well. So just highlighting as an example, FTA Section 5311 program, that's the rural formula funding for our rural agencies. DRPT is the recipient from the federal government, so from FTA. Our rural agencies do not get that money directly, they have to get it from us. And so we bring that up because we are in a unique role at the state level because we're seeing the state operating discussion play out in this forum, but we're also keeping in mind the impacts to all of our other programs. And specifically with our rural funding, there is a direct impact because every rural transit agency in Virginia gets both federal and state funding. So if their state funding goes down or their federal funding goes down, we need to just consider those balances. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then the last bullet point on this slide, talked about it again last month, but just hammering it home, leveraging predefined industry standards and cohorts could be the most simple and objective way for defining cohorts in our operating form. Okay, so moving to slide 31. I don't want to confuse folks. This is, I think everybody needs to understand though, where the agencies fall within the proposed cohorts of large urban, small urban, and rural. So you saw this slide on the last meeting. We've added a little bit more detail. So at the top, we just are reminding everyone the population thresholds. Again, those are defined by the U.S. Census. And then at the bottom, we made an additional note here that cohort designations are based on the area served, not the size of the agency. So kind of going back to what we were discussing earlier.
Again, I feel just because sometimes I'm the in between communicator, and I've heard a lot of confusion and questions. The whole point of the cohorts is that there are a similar set of measures that are used for the allocation. So that if you are in a rural area, the RPT will only use X measures to allocate that money. If you're in a small urban area, and this is, again, next conversation, what are the measures that will be used to allocate in a small urban area? And then what are the measures? So when you talk about data in the previous slide, that's important to know, but that really is going to play out next time. So if it happens to be, as we have a conversation about large urban, and we want to go gangbusters with data, that's where that can happen or not happen.
Exactly.
Because again, what's happening is people are conflating these two issues.
Yeah.
I keep wanting to like, just ground us now because things are even going to get more complicated. So if we can keep this as simple, because the complicated part to me is that next step. And we're not there yet, but so again, and I'm saying things, but I hope I'm just confirming things, is all we are saying is that a cohort will have the same measures to compete against each other. But we don't know what those measures are yet, and that will be figured out next time, or starting today, figure out next time. Yes, okay,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And the data point is a very good one because FTA requires different levels of detail of the data that's submitted to the federal government by these cohorts. So larger urban agencies have to collect more detailed information than small urban and rural agencies. And that could work to our advantage when we're thinking about those metrics, is that we don't have to figure out how do we collect PMT data, passenger miles travel data from rural agencies. We don't have to do that anymore because they're cohorted and we have different measures for each cohort. Very good point. Okay, so this is just refresher information for everyone. And here is policy decision 1A and DRPT's recommendation. You'll know by now, we're on slide 32, that our recommendation is to define the cohorts as rural, small urban, and large urban. Additionally, some points here at the bottom. Each transit agency in Virginia would be placed into one of these cohorts, consistent with FTA guidelines. For agencies that serve multiple areas, and we do have a couple, DRPT recommends using the predominant areas served by the agency. So District 3, Mountain Links is one, and then CSPDC Bright is the other one. And then the last bullet point here, do not overlook this one. This is an important one too. Additionally, DRPT recommends revisiting the list of agencies by cohort every three years or following a decennial census, whichever comes first. So the idea here is that we are recommending to lock in the cohorts, these three cohorts, for the next 3 years, or understanding that a census could fall directly in between a 3-year review. We want to have the ability to adapt based on the census changes. But we're trying to lock it. We're not going to revisit it every single year if we move forward with this policy.
And part of that is because unless there's a census, it's not going to change. Yeah. So.
But it can change a lot in those censuses.
It can, which is why we want to have that flexibility.
My question would be, what would trigger a change in cohort outside of the decennial census? Like if someone were to expand service into a different geographic area?
That's a good point, Paula. Is that, especially I'm thinking about you all, and also District 3. So District 3, just as an example, they are a mostly rural agency, but they dip into the Bristol urbanized area. Actually, it's in Abingdon. They have a route that serves the Abington area that's technically urban. And so they have a cost allocation plan, but the grand majority of their services are rural. It's kind of the opposite with CSPDC Bright. They serve the Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro urbanized area, but then they have some of their services dip into the rural area. But they are the majority is the urbanized area that they serve. I think what you're getting at, Paula, is that dynamic could change. Is that CSPDC maybe start expanding to the rural areas, and so instead of like a 70-30 split, it could be a 50-50, or it could totally swing the opposite direction. So I'm not sure what we want to do about that. Maybe we write something into the policy language that does allow us to adapt when agencies' service footprint changes. That is a very good point, that there could be a reason to revisit it.
I think that 3-year or decennial census would kind of catch that too.
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
you'd have that midpoint where, if one agency swings drastically, they're not likely going to expand significantly in one fiscal year. So by the time you get to that 3-year checkpoint, they may have caught up and may be ready to be reclassified, but probably not likely in a 1-year term would that switch happen.
Well, I think again, with the stability component of this, what we're trying to do is to show you like, here's kind of that baseline funding again for a 3-year period that you can anticipate. And then when we get into the sizing metric discussion, I mean, you may be able to see like, oh, actually, if I moved up to the next one, it's recalibrated based on X, Y, and Z. And is it, but I think being able to lock that in, we wouldn't anticipate a lot of change happening with these, to be totally honest, but there may be something,
If we just found out there was something going on, like even with the current form, we found out there were a few perverse things we didn't expect. You do the best you can up front to figure out what all the variables could be, but if something happens that isn't working out the way we want, I think just want to reserve that right to be able to look at
but
it.
I think having the 3-year period, because sometimes it is just a 1-year anomaly. And so we're
Right.
really, again, just trying to get at the,
Yeah, as
is
one
it
of
a trend or is it a blip, right?
I'd say it's one of the 2 agencies that would most likely that would happen to. I couldn't see a situation in which we would either expand so rapidly into an area that we would need to be allocated before a 3-year period, or that we would cut a significant portion of our urban service, which would then shift that. Like, that's not likely going to happen in any meaningful way before that 3-year mark, where we would then be able to reevaluate it at that point.
We would also, if that ever happened, we would also encourage CSPDC Bright or District 3, whoever's kind of doing these expansions, to enter into the demo program. Then the TRIP program for regional connectivity. So we see it 5 years before it actually happens. So you're kind of in that TRIP pipeline. It's a step down before you enter into our kind of stable, normal program. So, and we always encourage our agencies to make use of those programs. Very good point. Okay. Other thoughts, questions about policy decision 1A? Mr. Chair, I wasn't sure if you wanted to formally vote on this, do it as a package at the end, not vote, etc.
Well, I guess what I'd like to do at this point is to get at least a straw vote, so that we know that if everybody's comfortable moving ahead with this, and then we can vote on the whole package later on as a full piece, but at least be able to kind of put a marker down here and say, yes, okay.
Happy to, because he looks to me. So, I mean, I thought the idea of not having rural doing the same metrics as large urban areas 7 years ago. So clearly I support this concept. And so as you hear from me, my biggest concern is communication and understanding, because that is definitely getting caught. And, there are some opportunities in the communication. You're hearing it now. I know you're going to put it moving forward and how you say this maybe not be, you may use it as FTA designation, but it may be important to just say, we're going to use the census designations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then divorce that from that. The reality is a practicality is you guys are going to look to 5311, 5307, small 50, I get that. But I think that that's important. And so thank you for allowing me to sort of prophesize on that. So yeah, I mean, I always pained me to think that a major multimodal system to get the metrics that work for HRT and the metrics that work for some of our smallest, like it was just a weird concept. So like, I like it. Devil is in that next step. And so how we look at each of these and take the same amount of time or more on each of the MSA or whatever cohorts, I think is going to be really important. So we get those metrics right that work for those 3 buckets. So that's my point. That's my point.
Ms. Strauss' point, I would support 1A. I like doing a straw vote right now because we need to get to 1B and 2 and then look at it holistically. So to that point, we try to anticipate the unintended consequences.
Right.
So right now, my vote is yes, with the idea that we're talking area and geography.
Anything else on that?
I'm supportive of it.
Same here. Everybody. Yeah, that-
Same here.
That's a good thing.
Smoot?
I'm fine.
Yeah, and I support this with this. All right, so we're saying basically, yes, this is a bridge policy decision. Contingent on a final vote with the full set of recommendations. Okay.
Right. So yeah, that's foundational structural decision right there. We got a policy decision.
Yay.
Yay.
It's going to get harder as we keep going.
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
It's already
So
been
yeah.
hard for about 5 minutes, so.
Okay, so that's one end. All right, pivoting here to policy decision 1B. How do we split the total available merit operating revenues among each cohort? Again, I'll give you some key considerations here. We'll have our DRPT recommendation, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion on this one. So some key considerations. Percentages can be defined in CTV policy that split the available revenues among the cohorts in an effort to provide some stability and predictability. And defining these percentages in policy, so kind of locking them in for 3+ years, rather than adjusting them and being more dynamic year over year, would simplify the formula, and it will provide that predictability and stability. At least we believe it will. The identification of cohort percentages does not need to be based on a single factor. I want to kind of emphasize this one, that we need to really look at probably all of the data available, and all of those factors and their associated trends over the last handful of years. But to just define zero in on one single factor and use the splits, the percentage splits between the different area types or cohorts. Just look at things as a whole to identify what those logical splits might be. And then the last one here, just in terms of future considerations, future reviews of this can consider additional factors such as cost of living, service expansion, local revenue generation. There's all sorts of things and factors that you can incorporate into this decision. But to the point that Alan made earlier, we are under a tight timeline here. And so that's all that type of more complex stuff. It's probably, again, something for the study that we're doing to maybe look at other data sources to use to advise this decision here. So that's just some key considerations. Moving to slide 34 for those online. I forgot to mention that we actually do have some data here that we want to share with you. Okay, so what you see on the screen here, we have the cohorts identified. So rural, small urban, and large urban. So those are the color-coded rows. I want to draw your attention, your eyes, kind of moving left to right here first. And that kind of shows the distribution or the proportion of each cohort for each allocation or metric that's listed at the top. So you can kind of start to see some trends here. With the rural, you see allocations are 8 to 6%. And as you move right, their share is certainly a whole lot less than our other cohorts. But they, I don't want to say perform, they have a greater share of the revenue hours and miles. So and that's not surprising. These are rural agencies that provide service that's, very, you got really long routes for their trips. They're going really long distances because they don't have those destinations all clustered together. So that all makes sense. Small urban, you got kind of a different type of dynamic here, but a little bit more of a consistent one. Allocations, 10 to 13% over the last 4 years. Sizing metric, which I do want to mention, that's the sizing metric for the existing formula. And that, as a reminder, that's 50% operating costs, 30% ridership, 10% hours, 10% miles. So within that sizing metric of the current formula, you can see the distribution, 13 to 14%, very consistent. Operating costs, very consistent, 10 to 11%. Ridership is where you see the boost. And I'm going to get into this here probably in our next policy decision too, is that small urban, you see a very different dynamic because you have a handful of systems that serve university towns. Blacksburg Transit's a great example. Great ridership, off the charts. And that's why you see the proportionality of ridership higher in small urban. And then revenue hours and revenue miles is still kind of back to that normal proportionality. And then large urban is maybe also pretty stable here. Allocations 81 to 82%, sizing metric roughly 80, operating costs a little bit higher. Again, not surprising because generally speaking, our largest urban areas have higher cost of living. Ridership is where it goes down a little bit, as well as hours and miles in proportion. Something to just consider here. So yeah, before I move to our recommendation, these are like the trends here. I will kind of preface the recommendation saying that our recommendation is not a science, it's more of an art. We're looking at all of these data points, all of the trends, also taking into consideration, I mentioned this earlier, that DRPT manages other operating funding programs. So we're looking at everything as a whole. And we have to take that into consideration. So, go ahead. Flipping to slide 35, here's the recommendation for policy decision 1B. DRPT is recommending that the rural area will have 8% of the operating revenues. Small urban will get 12% of the operating revenues, and large urban will get 80% of the operating revenues. And then, don't want to overlook this at the bottom, we are also recommending, in an effort to enhance predictability and simplification, that we lock in these percentages in policy for the next 3 years and to be revisited at least every 3 years. Again, to provide that stability and simplification. So, who wants to lead the discussion here on comments?
I will. Mr. Chair. So looking at the slide previous, can we go back to that, to slide 34? So with your recommendation, is it based on the average for all 6 categories? Or is it, you said it's not a science, it's an art?
It's not a mathematical calculation.
It was not mathematical.
It is an art. So we're looking at all of these. These are all very important data points. But we're also factoring in these kind of outside forces of, we have to balance this with some of our other funding programs as well.
I will just add, like, it is not a science, but if you look at this, you see trends that are generally in line with what we're saying. Like if you put it all together and you look at it, sort of those total allocations, you get something along the lines of what we're saying. So
being from a large urban, of
Yeah.
course, I would notice that.
That sometimes it's over 80%, right? But sometimes it's under 80%. So.
Well, it's art and not science. I do have to say that you have a crystal ball because you headed this way, even a talent in it. In case we knew, we were going to have a conversation on this. In our last meeting, when we had recommendation or thought for percentage breakout, it was totally on the operating costs. Not dissimilar from this, I will note. But I didn't like it just on one metric. Because we've always used operating costs as a proxy, but it was in the performance level, not at this level. So I had some angst about it just being that. So when I saw that we were looking at a mix of stuff that created trends, I felt better that we were sort of truth testing the split. So that's just my initial observation that the high level operating trends that this kind of makes sense. Like if I was doing my CIP or my budget, that was probably my kind of recommendation to my governing body.
And this is where, again, like thinking about this in combination, I know we're like, keep doing four-dimensional chess, blah, 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 but like this is the cohorting bucket, and then we'll still have the sizing metrics. So that's where we can play around to see like, okay, for this particular cohort, we might want to, you know, make ridership count less, or and other things cost more, you know, revenue miles cost more. Likewise, for the large urban, we might say, let's really make, you know, operating costs cost more. For the small urban, where ridership is really kind of where they're peak performing, like, so this is like that general division of the pot, but then within that, we can again play around a little bit with the sizing.
And I think that's part of my concern in what is being presented, is that we are, again, going and conflating the two things. The conversation about predictable.
Yeah.
All that needs to be predictable is what we have from allocations from before. And so we see there's a change. So what I'd like to hear is the rationale to reduce the pot of money that larger urbanized areas would have access to, and increasing the pot of money that rural areas would have access to. Looks like the small urban areas remain the same. So what I want to hear is the rationale for when we talked about predictable, this is now said it's not predictable. It might be predictable moving forward. So something's changed between this year and next year. And so what I want to understand and hear is that what is DRPT's rationale for why large urban areas should have less money and rural areas should have more. It might be perfectly reasonable, but I think people need to really understand, because that is effectively, because really it is the allocation pot. So we're changing that, maybe for very good reasons. But I think people need to understand why there is a shift of 2% from the large urban pot to the rurals. And I think that needs to be very transparent.
Yeah, very good point. And we've talked about this internally as well. So first of all, for some context here, 1 percentage point is roughly $1.2 million. Okay. So if we're talking about, 1 percentage point, that's how much money it is based on our current, revenues. What Kate's pointing out is on the left here, allocations, that's what she's honing in on, is you look at rural, 8%, 7%, 6%, 6%. Large urban, 82, 81, 81, 82. Those cohorts were recommending 8% for rural, 80% for large urban.
Yes.
So that's what Kate's highlighting. There are a number of, I think, reasons why we landed on 80 for large urban, 8 for rural. What I mentioned earlier about our other programs and having to take that into account. Our rural program is a little unique. We have currently some areas in Virginia that have no transit service at all. And that's always been the case. But our rural funding that provides operating support to these agencies, just to give everybody a little context here, rural federal transit funding has been mostly flat over the years. We did get a boost in IIJA, as did our urban agencies. They got actually a significant boost, but it's not these significant increases in revenues year over. It's mostly flat with an inflationary factor. The needs of rural transit in Virginia very clearly, I mean, this has been happening for almost 10 years now, have been growing way faster than the federal revenues have. So it's not, the federal revenues to support these systems is not keeping pace. COVID certainly helped. We got all the additional CARES and ARPA funding. That was great. Those revenues are exhausted now, so we don't have those anymore. And so some things have happened over the last 5 years. First of all, we've had some very successful micro transit services in our rural areas. I'll give a shout out to Bay Transit and to Mountain Empire Transit in Southwest Virginia. Those services have been incredible. They got a federal discretionary grant through us back 5-6 years ago. And what those examples did were it really highlighted how rural transit could function really, really well. And some of these communities in Virginia that have historically never had transit before, they see what's going on at Bay and at Mountain Empire. And they have come to us and said, we want to start transit in our community. How do we start? Okay. And so this is the unique aspect of our rural cohort in particular, is that we see we have a number of services kind of in the pipeline right now. They're either in planning or demo or trip, and they will be entering into our rural program over the next however many years. And so we're kind of not just looking at right now and the historical data, we're looking a few years into the future here and saying, oh gosh, our needs are far outpacing the available revenues, specifically within this cohort. And I know large urban agencies deal with similar issues with, their needs outpacing the federal revenues. Totally get that. Well, our recommendation is kind of like looking holistically at this and seeing how our other programs will be impacted in the future.
So, for fear of sounding snarky, I don't want to sound snarky. DRPT is going to make a priority for helping new rural systems get started and using this pot of money for that. If we really had needs, we do. We're trying to make a big case for more state aid. You and I talked a little bit ahead of time about the federal space. The federal space is a big, huge mess because starting September 1, IJ is gone and the federal mass transit account will be insolvent next year before the highway part of it. So we're all in a boatload of hurt in the federal space. And it's hard, but I think it's important, but if the state has said the priority is on the rural areas, I think we need to hear that because we, as you even attested to, the needs are all over the place, which is why we did a major funding package that is still not resolved at the state level. And so that's part of my anxiety is like, we all have needs. We're trying to make a General Assembly ask. And it seems like the numbers that are being addressed in here are, instead of doing a General Assembly ask to get more money for our rurals, we're going to shift money around. The optics are hard. I mean, I don't know if there's a compromise conversation in here, but I think the optics are hard to go for a 2% shift from our large urban to our rural because they actually all have needs. And that's exactly why we went and tried to get a boatload of money in the General Assembly that is still unresolved and maybe we'll be back next year or the year after. So all I'm trying to be is transparent in what's being proposed so that people can say, hey, yeah, we want the states to be focusing and moving money to help our rural folks. They're really important. I get it. But it's just a thing. It's just a thing. So, and I just said it out loud. I was going to say, and we're having conversations about how to.
Here for discussion and input on folks. I think, again, this is for the merit operating. When we looked at merit capital, so it's the big picture. This is the merit funding. We have other programs that we are also funding that the large urbans tend to come in and do better and do well. But I do think on the operating support side, yes, we are trying to figure out how to support those in a way that won't decimate urban. So, I mean, if it's the 2% cut is really painful and folks can't live with it, or we need to, modulate that if it's, we want to have that discussion here and hear from folks. But yeah, we are trying to look at the full set of state needs and the full set of DRPT programs, which this isn't the only pot of money that we give as an agency.
Right. I'll just sort of speak, and I'm not really talking about the percentage in general, but just from a smaller rural agency perspective, if these numbers are locked in for 3 years and you have these agencies that are coming in to the pipeline, I know Town of Bedford, I'm pretty sure it's going to be in the 27 funding cycle. They've been in a demo. If we're locked in and these agencies come in midstream, now you're splitting that pot of funds even further between those smaller agencies, and that can create some turmoil at the local level of how do you make up those revenues. Not to say that the large and small urbans don't have those same challenges, but I know from a smaller rural perspective, $10,000 is a lot to make up, even though it doesn't sound like it's a large amount. And a lot of times that ends up being a cut to service or a cut to a program or a cut to a position to make up that deficit.
I'll play the devil's advocate on the rural side and kind of piggyback on what Brian said. And this is not, I mean, we know that every locality does not want to have to increase their budgets to spend more. If there's cuts to federal or state money, the localities have to pick up the slack. There are a lot of agencies in these rural and small urban pods that do not have any other funding option available. For example, our district, we cannot create a transportation authority to generate our own revenue, but we are not allowed by the law, by code, because we're on the 81 corridor. So whereas there's some urban areas that, while no one wants to have to do that, there are alternative ways to generate revenue to make up those smaller discrepancies. Whereas in the rural and small urban, some of us, we would just, like Brian said, we'd have to cut service. We wouldn't have another option.
This is exactly the context I want to hear because it's helpful. We don't know all the things that are going on all the time.
So,
Just a comment, as I was listening to all the sides, I went back and just did some math on allocation, kind of rounding it up. So I went on slide 34 and just averaged the 4 years for each group. And so you would get 7%, 12%, 81%. So it's not far off, but it's sort of like, and I did allocate operating costs because that's the higher bucket. Kind of like comes in between what the allocation is and what the recommendation is. Doesn't what sort of the compromise negotiating point, but not necessarily a recommendation. It's just quick math. I think that's something that's helpful.
Just a point of clarification. In policy decision 1B, it's these percentages is proposed to be revisited every 3 years. Does it make sense to also include after a decennial census in case they're shifting around between the different areas?
Yeah.
We had 2 shifts last night.
And I would also, if there's major federal or state legislation affecting all of this kind of stuff, we're all going to have to like take a moment, right? It is possible that the rules in a reauthorization will do very well at the federal level. That has been a work, and we hope that's the case.
That is possible. That is possible. And it could also be,
the other way.
The General Assembly will surprise us and take care of all of Northern Virginia's
Well, it wasn't one of
issues,
it was everybody's issues will be taken care of with the General Assembly ask. It was not in Northern Virginia's case. It's everybody's.
High rises all boats. Let me get it.
Of that legislation.
All right, well, go ahead.
Never mind.
And so it sounds like if we think about this in a straw vote, if I'm hearing right from Cindy and Kate, maybe there's an alternate that would be 7%, 12%, 81%.
John, if I may ask a question.
Rounding up by 50%.
yes, sir. Dr. Smoot, go right. Right?
He's talking, but he's on mute.
Dr. Smith,
you're on
currently
mute.
muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. As we look statewide, it would be helpful, I think, to have some context for the extent to which the programs that we're talking about here essentially represent all of the transit service to those areas, unlike, say, more urban areas where there are literally hundreds of millions of dollars of state money, not to mention other sources, that support things for mass transit. There is no mass transit that I'm aware of in these rural areas, or there's certainly very little of it. And this is one program, but to understand it in the context of what all is going on out there would be helpful to me.
I think we definitely want to be mindful of the opportunities, especially maybe in the looking at the federal program moving forward, is that continue the strong. So the rurals are the only ones that get the operating assistance, to continue that strong and make the case for that to continue. I think the thing I like about the compromise, it actually is 1.2 million more to the rural programs than we had this year, and I think that's a really nice, because that, as you guys have said, that 1.2 million can actually go really far. You know, so that's 1.2 million more than this year. And so that's a benefit.
Small urban basically
Stays the same. Yep.
And then large urban.
You see a loss of 1.2, which would be
Average wise, it comes out the same, and it obviously pie hasn't changed, so something had to shift on the slices.
So how does that strike members? I guess I'd ask.
I think that sounds fine based on current allocations and the past allocations we're looking at. But I guess I would just want to know DRPT's perspective is, you know, indicating that they're proposing the 8 instead of the 6 or 7 because they know that in the next 3-year period, you know, if you were to look at the next 3 years on this allocation table, it would likely shift up towards that 8% with new systems coming online in the rural area. So, I mean, I think I'm fine with a compromise, but that might just put this back in a bind 3 years from now, where maybe instead of it being at 8, it has to go up to 9 or 10 because those new systems are all in the mix.
I guess I wonder about the question, if we've talked a little bit about the possibility of some discretionary funds that are out there in different areas to deal with unusual circumstances. The creation of a new transit agency would seem to me to be an unusual circumstance. Might be assisted by dipping into some of those funds. Is that?
So I do think, I think for this next 3-year period, we at DRPT, I think could make that compromise work. I think because we will see sort of what plays out. We wanted to have the flexibility within there when we came with the 8%. We may see, you know, more rural areas might be able to take advantage of TRIP with the changes of putting paratransit in there. So to the point of like, how do all the things work in tandem together? Because again, we see a real growing demand for rural transit, which often is in the form of micro transit or paratransit. So we want to have that space. I think if there was something that would trigger to look at this, we were saying at least every 3 years. Again, I want to keep the balance of like, we just hate it in the world of transportation when we set something in stone, or right, you like pass the zoning code reform and then the next year you have an amendment of like 92 different changes and you're like, what was the point of doing that? So to the extent that, you know, I think we have some discipline of, you know, it would really have to be something substantial to change that. But I think if there's a strong feeling amongst this group that it's causing pain to go to that 80, we can kind of keep talking and working that through. We can look at the full picture. I think Dr. Smoot, again, just underscoring your point, which was what I was trying to get at before too. There are other DRPT regional and federal funds. And so this is one part of that puzzle, but this part of the puzzle is really important for those small rural folks. So
And I said, and I think many folks around the table, we're going to continue, if things have fallen apart with the General Assembly, a part of the packages, the funding packages for transit in the General Assembly, we're growing the merit program. It was not a Northern Virginia bill. I want to make that very clear. The bills that were put forward had major increases to the tune of like 20+% increases. So ideally, we get to a place where these are the allocations and each of them go up 20% when we have the funding packages that we need. So that's should not be gone from all of us, is that we need to make the pot bigger. In the meantime, I like closer to predictability on the pots that we have. But we know that we need to be making the case to make the pots bigger, and perhaps in the argument of making the pots bigger, is working with our colleagues at CTAB to make sure that they are engaged in that legislative process to be making the case, because I'm not sure we were aware, the VTA world, I don't think we were aware that were new systems going to start, and that would have actually potentially been very helpful in the lobbying effort for the transit funding. So.
I think having the predictability hopefully also helps, where you can see like, this is where we're at and this is why we actually need more funding if it's not getting you where you're at.
Absolutely.
I don't want to misconstrue anything of like, we are doing this because of the federal, because who knows what's ultimately going to, I'm not going to put any eggs in that basket. Like, we'll see kind of what happens, right? So this is really responding to kind of the dynamics that we're seeing here. We have seen that federal funding has been flat, and we have been, this year you'll see in the SIP, we're really kind of hitting that point where the operating requests that are coming in for rural, we're challenged to meet those in ways that we're not on the urban and the small urban side. So.
I guess one data point I think would be helpful to consider, and I don't know if you all looked at it, but the 8% that's going to rural, taking aside all other performance metrics that would go into divvying up those funds, if you just proportionally distributed among the 19 agencies, how close does it get to exceeding 30%, hitting the 30% cap?
You're saying equal proportion?
Yeah, if there's not like, because I know we still have those policies, but is 8% going to have, if we distributed it proportionally based on their budget, would they all hit their 30% cap? Would they be at 25% of the budget? Like, I think that would at least help me to understand from a context of like, what is the impact? I mean, if 8% is hitting everything at 30% already, and you've got funds left over, I don't have as much heartburn as maybe 1% to the shift, that 1% shift. But if it's.
That is definitely something that we could pretty simply run the numbers on. Data. And Dan, to catch you up.
I'm sorry, but that's chicken lunch.
See what happens.
And there is a good data point there. It is here.
Well, it depends somewhat on what your metrics are going to be, though. But you could probably still.
He's asking apart from the size, like, because I think the sizing metric, like, again, like, we're not going to propose just like the equal split, because we do still like rural. We got good performance. So like, say theoretically, we saw if we did it by 8%. Is that if we were to just allocate it fairly to everybody, are folks hitting the cap or not? We're not going to be allocating it.
We can certainly run that.
For everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking back to like 22 and 23 when there was so much revenue.
Yes.
And you couldn't run it because you couldn't distribute it all because every agency was
hitting the cap.
And my inclination here is that, a 1 or 2% bump in the rural area won't bring everybody to 30%, but it could bring more.
Yeah.
But it all depends on how much revenue you have. And
So would we be able to run kind of that quick?
We can run that based on this year, last year, the year before. We can't necessarily do it based on future years.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough.
Sure. Follow-up question. That's actually a good point. And this was a question I would have for the next step. But once all the agencies have hit their cap within their cohorts, then we have that, if there's that money left over that goes into that performance pot, maybe we have to make this decision the next step, but does that money then go to the performance pot that is shared among all 3 cohorts? Or does each cohort have its own performance pots? Because if it goes to one large performance pot, then that might help Northern Virginia out in that if there's extra money that's not being used by those rural systems, if it turns out that 8% is more than what was needed, and then that excess comes back into the performance pot, then they may have another opportunity to access some of those additional
Sorry,
funds.
yeah, I'm laughing. It's because you must have hacked into Grant and I's conversation the other week. This is exactly what, as we're trying to build
Yeah.
these out. But no, we've thought about what those further steps look like for sure. So
Yeah, so it's kind of like,
we're flagging that.
we definitely have to make, concrete decisions at each step so that we have a foundation for making the next decision. But that doesn't mean that there's not other possibilities in the next steps that could help, help these previous decisions.
The nuances of how we apply the 30% cap and what we do with those excess revenues could help advise this conversation. So yeah, it's a very good point. We need to be thinking of it as a whole, but we need to keep the conversation moving and start making some decisions. So it's like,
Definitely iterative, definitely why I personally don't want to do a full vote on any component till we see it all. But John, to your point, I went back to slide 28, which picks up Paula's point on the extra money goes into our performance fund. Remember, we're actually calling it Performance and Stability Fund. So there, we, had a slight few brainstormings, but you could have a minimum and maximum loss and make somebody whole. So when this shifts, so anyway, just throw that out, kind of picking up as you asked that question, what if there was a new system? Well, a new system might be a stability piece, or it could just help with allocations and there's no major shift.
And you can make that argument the other way too. If we give more, the 81%, if we concede that and go 81% to the large urbans and they don't use all that money, then that money might be freed up for the small urban and rural too. So I think, either way, 1%, even though that's not an insignificant amount of money, it might balance out in the end, in the long run. Once we get to those next steps, we won't know until we get there.
And I think the RPT has consistently said we needed the policy underpinning before they could run numbers. So we're starting to get some foundation to run the numbers so we can actually answer those questions.
So other questions, other concerns?
I guess for running the numbers and moving into the next step, I would welcome and like to propose maybe doing 7, 12, and 81 for those numbers and done the recommendation. Unless you can do it both ways and see what that 1% does.
Yeah.
That's one consensus vote, and I don't know if I have all of TSDAC, so I just put that out for.
Well, I guess I'd say in terms of a straw vote, we'd like to see that result, right? So that it's not a formal decision, but it is signaling that this might be an acceptable.
Yes, my recommendation is straw.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, we've been obviously in communication association that we represent, and that compromise seems fairly reasonable. 7, 12, 81.
All right, well, should we see if that's got legs? We have a, it's not a motion for adoption, but it is a straw vote. So Cindy opposed it, so I'm assuming. you're okay with
I'm
that?
a yes.
And Kate used, okay, Noel?
I think I'd still like to understand that 1% impact before I commit.
Well, it's,
Just to understand, but
right, sure.
In theory,
Yeah.
I think we're,
Well, again, I think what we're saying.
Votes you can abstain.
yeah. I think we're 90% there, but I think in theory it's.
90 or
What's in the
91? Sorry.
And Ray, Dr. Spoot, do you have a number with that?
No, I have nothing further.
Okay, okay. And I would certainly support that and agree.
I have shared some of Brian's questions, but we will definitely support running that analysis, looking at that. If there is a concern that we think is real startling, we will get back and let the folks know. If we do that analysis and it seems like it can make things work, we will keep moving ahead with that proposal then.
Okay. Certainly a straw. All right.
all right.
at least it gives us an opportunity to give some
Exactly.
direction for further.
I'd say that
research.
move from straw to sticks, like
Yes.
we're trying to build it. Not quite a brick.
No,
but
no.
it's,
Hey, that's great. That was a great discussion. Very good points. This is the last slide for really this first section of the conversation. We wanted to show you guys that this is just kind of a running list of policy recommendations. We wanted to kind of track them and bring these forward to you all as a reminder. We'll continue as kind of decisions keep getting made to build onto this list. And so we'll show this probably at every meeting moving forward with additional policy considerations and recommendations. So, but yeah, this just shows the ones that were made, I believe, at the last meeting regarding the capital program. And then 1A and 1B are on here. And we got a handful in policy decision number 2 that we'll add for the next one. So unless, well, already did a lot of that. Unless there are any questions, lunch is here. We are 5 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
So what time do we have? Back at 12:30. Okay. So the next section is definitely going to generate a whole lot more conversation. So let's try to stay on schedule and reconvene at 12.
Very good.
All right.
We're recessed now then.
Okay. Great conversation, beginning of the day. Dan was actually able to crunch the numbers to Brian, your question from earlier. Did a quick crunch of the numbers. Dan, do you want to quickly share what you shared with me?
I can, just to make sure I understood the question correctly. To see, we were looking at going from today's allocation to, assigning either 8 or 7% of the revenues to rural. How many would hit their 30% cap, correct? Okay, so currently, in the current formula run, one of our agencies would have hit the 30% cap in the rural category under a 7%. This is using the sizing and performance metrics as they exist in the current formula, right? So it's just running it through the formula to see the output of it, okay? So under 7%, 9 of them would have hit the 30%, and under 8%, 12 of them would have hit the 30%.
Out of 19?
It's actually 20
20
because
now, 27.
we have an extra one in there this year.
That's right.
Okay.
I think for me, with that, I'm fine with the 81.
So it's only difference of 3.
Yeah, 81, 12.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a difference of 3 hitting their 30% caps, but all of them would experience an increased allocation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. It's a good
I think
story.
that helps me put it into perspective, because going from 1 hitting the 30% cap present to 12 and 8%, that's a big jump. So
big jump.
Shifting that 1% to the large urban isn't going to be too much harder.
Putting in the right direction for the world.
It all also depends on how you do the redistribution after the 30% cap. I mean, this is going through the whole piece.
We're looking for round numbers.
It's just a small.
Round numbers are nice.
At this point in time, that's.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
No problem.
Okay, so we have found some general consensus surrounding policy decisions 1A and 1B. We're not too far off. We're very close there, which is great. We're not coming forward with any more policy recommendations for the rest of this conversation today. This is more getting into policy decision number 2, which is a big one, but now we're into the cohorts, okay? So just kind of teeing that up. Gosh, of course, it's not advancing. 2 seconds.
You gotta bring it over on the screen, probably.
Okay.
All right, the good thing is we can see all of this live, so.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Dr. Smith agreed today.
Thank you, Dr. Smoot, for being patient with us. Okay, so we are moving into that policy decision number 2, and we do intend to bring some recommendations forward to this group at our May meeting. But we're kind of switching gears, and we got to be thinking, all of our minds have to be thinking about, we are now in the cohorts. So we have rural, small urban, and large urban, and now that we're in the cohorts, we can customize the sizing metrics by cohort. So that's what we're talking about here. So So policy decision number 2 is defining those sizing metrics within each cohort. What you can see on the screen here, the current sizing metric. So as a reminder, 50% operating cost, 30% ridership, 10% revenue hours, 10% revenue miles. They're currently all the same because that's what the current formula has, 50, 30, 10, 10. Okay? And we can customize those weights within each cohort. A reminder to everyone, these are very likely the only metrics we can use for sizing metrics. We don't want to be talking about new metrics to introduce into the sizing. That would lead us down all sorts of rabbit holes and we would not be able to accomplish this within the time frame that we're given. So possibly for future consideration, of course, but for what we're doing here today, we have to focus on those 4 metrics. I'll say it a million times here. It's cost, ridership, hours, and miles. And what are those weightings within each cohort? The next few slides that I'm going to cover with you, I'm going to document some, we're going to go through cohort by cohort. We're going to document some considerations as well as some kind of key questions that will require trade-offs within each cohort. And there are also some technical trade-offs here. I wanted to point this one out, is that the actual data that's being used, so you see the metrics, the 4 metrics, the data that's being used doesn't have to be single-year data. It could be a 3-year average or a 5-year average or a 2-year average. And that is something that we identified at the staff level that could possibly solve some of our stability issues if we incorporate 3 years. The current sizing metric in the formula is 1 year of data. And we think that that's one of the root causes for all of this fluctuation in the current formula. So that's just something, and one of our key transit partners mentioned that as well the other day when we were talking to a group getting feedback on this whole thing. Well, it was pointed out that maybe introducing 3-year averages could help solve our stability problem. So that's a technical trade-off, because on the flip side, if you use 1 year, you're being able to adapt to changes, growing agencies, agencies might lose service overnight because they lost a university contract. So one could argue they deserve less in the sizing metric. So there's a trade-off. It's like stability or kind of dynamic adaptability. And so we got to be thinking through the actual data used as well. Okay, so a rural cohort. Some key observations here. These should all be pretty obvious to you all. Rural agencies tend to have low operating costs, or lower, relatively speaking, and they travel long distances for service delivery. Okay. We brought this up, I believe, at the last meeting, that maximizing ridership is not always a top priority for agencies that serve these areas, but rather getting individuals to medical appointments and other essential services is their top priority. Additionally, the ability to enhance service efficiency is really hard for these agencies, because when you're traveling really long distances, like taking people, dozens of miles to get to the doctor, how much more efficient can you really be with that trip? It's really, really hard to do that. A lot of our rural agencies do not operate fixed transit routes. They are demand responsive services, which. Okay. Now I can't advance. Sorry, bear with me 1 second, everyone.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, just me.
I didn't see it.
Okay, good. Has a mind of its own. So yeah, their ability to make their service more efficient is definitely limited compared to other agencies that are large. You mentioned this in the previous section, the DRPT does act as a designated recipient for agencies that serve the rural areas for Section 5311 funding, which is FTA's formula funding for rural transit. And so we provide federal operating assistance to each of the agencies that serve the rural area. And then of note, the modes of transit service operated in this cohort are kind of your traditional transit modes. You got some fixed route, a lot of demand response / paratransit services, as well as a couple of commuter bus services. Okay, so questions to consider. And the way that these slides look, it's the same for each cohort. You got the number of agencies on the top right. You have the current sizing metrics at the top, just to remind everybody what it is currently, and then kind of the key questions there at the bottom. The big question here is, what should the sizing weights for rural public transit be? So do we want to keep all 4 sizing metrics? Cost, ridership, revenue miles, revenue hours? I think with this specific cohort, you could maybe make an argument to not use all 4. You want to use just 3? I don't know. That's something for you all to consider. Should we reduce the weight of ridership in favor of service delivery metrics, such as hours and miles? An argument can certainly be made there, considering how these agencies are not really that zeroed in on increasing ridership, because that's not really their purpose. So you could certainly argue for reducing the weight of ridership. But keep in mind, this is 100% between these metrics. So if you reduce ridership, where would you potentially go up? Would it be with the revenue hours and revenue miles? Would it be cost? Things to consider. And then the last question for our rural cohort is, should cost remain the driving metric here? That's kind of a consistent question for all of these, because 50% of the existing sizing metric is cost. Is that appropriate still now that we're in our different countries? So things to consider. And I should also mention, I forgot to say this earlier, but you all have printouts in front of you with all of the data by cohort and by agency. Okay, and this is data for the last 3 years. So you'll see there's a column for 3-year average of cost, hours, miles, and ridership for all of our agencies. And then there's a percentage column as well, which is what their share of that metric is compared to all of the rest of their cohort. So that, it's a lot of data, but this is gonna be, I think, more relevant to you all as we do an interactive activity here in a little bit, where we ask you all to define the weights within each cohort. So you'll have all that data to kind of help advise those decisions.
May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Smoot.
Help us with the definition of revenue hours and revenue miles. Does that mean hours and miles where fare is being collected, or what?
Correct. It is when they are in revenue service, so they are collecting a fare. And for agencies that don't collect a fare, it's really just when you start your transit service, your scheduled service.
Okay, so it would it include or not include times that transit is operating, but it is not collecting any revenue, like it took someone in one direction and that's going back empty?
Yes, that is an excellent question, Dr. Smoot. So I'm going to rewind to our last 2-3 TSDAC meetings. There was a decision made that we were going to make an administrative change to how we define deadhead hours and miles. You might recall that we have some commuter services, like PRTC is a great example up in the Northern Virginia area. They essentially take everyone from the Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, greater area, take them up to the DC metro area. So we have historically allowed for deadhead miles to be included. So the deadhead miles being the miles going back to their home base with no passengers on their bus. We have allowed those miles and those hours to be included in what we define as revenue hours and revenue miles if it meets very specific criteria. and Dan, I'm going to rely on you for this definition. I believe it has to be over 20 miles one way.
Yeah, unidirectional 20-mile commuter routes.
Okay. So unidirectional
Greater than
20-mile routes. And so I think don't we only have 3 agencies that meet that criteria currently?
Yeah, currently reporting. That's correct.
And are any of them in the rural cohort? Or
None
not?
of them are in the rural cohort. They're all in the large urban cohort. So yeah, the deadhead stuff does not relevant for rural, not even relevant for small urban, is relevant for large urban. So very good point. Dan, you want to?
Okay,
Yeah, I just wanna-
thank you. And one other perhaps related question, and I'm going to use an exaggerated example to make the point of the question. If a person were being taken, let's just say for a dialysis treatment, and you have one person going in one direction, obviously it would be more efficient if you were running a van, particularly if they're mobility impaired, or an automobile, than it would be to run a 56 passenger bus. How do we assess or put into our calculations of efficiency matters of that nature?
That is a very good point. I think that question really factors more into our performance and efficiency conversation. This conversation is more to determine the relative size of the agency compared to all of the other agencies within their cohort. Maria, you want to?
Does it get captured somewhat though in the operating cost of, it's presumably would cost more to operate a 35-foot bus than a small van?
Yeah, I mean, yes, to a certain degree. I do want to mention that like the type of bus, that's really more of a capital difference in terms of whether you're operating using a van versus a 40-foot bus for service. The operational costs are really minimal because the key cost is the driver and all the benefits and everything associated with that. So, but fuel, gasoline versus diesel, I mean, there's some differences there. And then maintenance, there's some differences, but relatively speaking, it's really around the edges.
But I was going to say, and to further, in the rural providers, we've got 20, as you mentioned. Their fleet, I would have expected, are primarily cutaways and small. They're not 40-foot buses.
That is correct.
Right. So I think it's good to,
That's a good point. And just to be clear on that, Dr. Smoot, for your awareness, and well, for everyone, we do not have any heavy-duty buses in our rural transit agencies. They are all cutaways or vans.
Thank you. Good to know.
I was going to add just one clarifying point here on revenue hours and revenue miles. That indicates essentially, because some agencies do not collect revenue, it's essentially in-service hours and in-service miles, agnostic of whether there are people riding the bus or not. Whereas deadhead is when you're heading back to your administrative or maintenance facility. Okay, so revenue hours are in-service hours and in-service miles. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actual hours and miles that's listed on your schedule.
Yes.
So fare free is ignored in that calculation, right?
It is ignored because when the hours and miles that the transit operator is providing service count as revenue hours and revenue miles, even though they're not technically collecting revenue on it.
Thank you.
So a good example in the rural cohort, Jaunt is one of our rural providers serving the rural area. They're zero fare. They have a scheduled start time. And so when those buses go out at that scheduled start time, they're technically in revenue service, even though they're not actually collecting a fare.
Yeah. And if I could add also just one more other point to the sizing metrics, Dr. Smoot, is that, again, to Grant's point, these are relative metrics that indicate the size of an agency. What you're getting at is the performance metrics, where we look at their cost efficiency and their service efficiency. So just to hold, I guess I'd say hold tight on that.
Okay.
for the rural providers, How many of the 20 have fixed route versus are 100% demand response?
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I don't know that I know that.
Some of them have both.
Because that's about
Yeah.
service characteristics, right?
Yeah.
If they're all demand response, that makes it easier to look at them again,
They're not
cohort.
all demand.
So, yeah,
No,
so
it's about
most have
half and
both.
Yeah, I didn't think so, but,
Yeah, a lot of them have both.
okay,
And even some small urbans do both.
no, it's helpful.
Responsive.
Yeah, and then it's like micro transit's a little bit of both, kind of, it's a little bit in between, and so we have some of those as well. So yeah, I mean, if you're really interested, we could give you all information on, agency by mode or agency
Just
by
characteristics.
cohort and the modes that are operated by each agency.
Well, part of it is just as you step back, now we're looking at rural. What are the service and characteristics that make them, now we said they're serving rural areas, not one thing, but when it comes to picking what metrics, understanding what the composition of services they provide, it's helpful to then know what metrics make sense. And I don't think, I mean, so, and I know some of us are less familiar
Well,
with the rural
And
characteristics.
so
I wanna make
maybe,
sure we're not
yeah,
skipping
maybe
that.
Grant, you could give us a little bit, knowing there's a lot of nuance and no place is the same, but I think there are some things in terms of, average agency size, some of them are contracted out, some of them are insert, like, just some of those characteristics that might help us.
That would be awesome. Just a flavor.
Yeah. So there are some rural providers that are contracted out. Most of them are directly operated. I'd say most of them provide, I think all of them provide some degree of demand responsive service. The fixed route, I mean, I can think of off the top of my head about half of the agencies provide some degree of fixed route service. And when you provide fixed route, then you have to, by federal law, do complimentary paratransit service. And a lot of our rural agencies meet that ADA requirement, not by doing your traditional ADA paratransit service with a separate vehicle. They do what is technically allowable by FTA to do something called deviated fixed route. The pros and cons to that model, but basically they would take the bus, and if somebody who is an ADA passenger within the 3/4 of a mile requests a trip, the fixed route bus will go off the course to pick up that individual and then try to get back on. It's really hard. It's not really the best operating model because it doesn't do it justice to the fixed route customers that just trying to get from point A to point B. The schedule gets blown up. So then it's not great, but it is a way to reduce costs because otherwise you're going to have someone dedicated to doing that ADA paratransit service. So there's trade-offs. But I do think that the metrics by mode within each cohort is going to be, well, we can certainly provide that. It's going to be way more relevant for larger. I'm going to get to this in a little bit. There's a lot of modal diversity within the large urban cohort and the agencies that serve those areas. So I do think that metrics by mode, and one thing that Dan's about to say this, is if we don't have cost by mode, and that gets back to what we said earlier. We have ridership, we have hours, we have miles. We don't have cost. Is that what you were going to mention, Dan?
It was not. I was going to ask, mention one other service characteristic. From my point of view, as somebody crunching these numbers, our rural area probably has the most diverse of service areas that they're providing to. Some of them that are providing a demand response service have to respond to calls from an entire county or series of counties. Some of them that are operating fixed routes are more serving small towns or connections between small towns. And so it's a wide range out there, and it makes it particularly difficult to say what is better performance in those areas because they literally have different goals. And so it's kind of like comparing commuter service to local fixed route service in an urban area. But there's a wide array of operational circumstances, including a place like Chincoteague, which is very small, and it's mostly it's a seasonal service out there in the summertime. And so I just wanted to mention that there are characteristic service differences between these agencies.
Yeah, great point. And I always think of outliers here. Think of Chincoteague being one of our really smallest rural agencies. They have one route called the Pony Express, great service, goes up and down the main drag. It's a small fixed route, seasonal service. And then you compare to Blackstone area bus, which it has the biggest service area in the entire Commonwealth. They connect all the way from Charlottesville down to the North Carolina border.
Yeah.
So they cover a giant area. So just very, very different area types, I guess, within the rural cohort that are served.
Just one other note on that is that operating costs for our smallest rural agency, $83,000 a year. And the largest rural is about 5.5. And so it's a pretty big range within a, smaller denominations. Thank you, Greg.
Okay. So now we're going to pivot to small urban and some key observations here. So kind of dovetailing off of that, small urban transit agencies have a wide variety of service miles and characteristics. And to the second point here, some agencies serve large universities and thus have high performance metrics, while others tend to be more rural in nature with long trips and relatively low ridership. This is a very interesting cohort. You can look at your data sheets too. You have 4-ish agencies that are really high at the top, and you got 5 that are much lower in terms of their metrics. And the 4 that are kind of towards the top, not surprisingly, those are the university town systems. You got Blacksburg, you got Harrisonburg, Charlottesville, and I'll throw WADA in there as well for William and Mary. So their metrics are generally higher than the other agencies in this cohort. And we're comparing, like this cohort has Bristol and Winchester. Those are much smaller agencies with smaller metrics. Additionally, within this cohort, some observations, we have 2 agencies that are unionized. So that's going to start coming into play when we're talking about cost. That comes way more into play with the large urban cohort. We have 1 agency that is a full turnkey operation. So operations and maintenance are contracted out. Followed CSPDC represents that agency. And then we have 1 agency that has less annual ridership than the average rural agency. So I'm pretty confident that's Bristol. And they are very, very low metrics compared to their cohort. Something to keep in mind. The second to last bullet point here, something else to consider. I'm going to expand on this here as we get into policy decision number 3. But something to be aware of is that small urban transit agencies, their federal funding, they get 5307 formula funding, but they're unique because some of their formula funding is actually more, it's tied to meeting certain performance metrics. So FTA has something called STIC funding, which is small transit intensive cities funding. And the way that works is basically they have FTA gives formula funding and sets a baseline amount of 5307 that each agency gets in this cohort. And then if agencies meet the national average or meet or exceed the national average in 6 defined metrics, then they get a boost on top of their base funding to the tune of roughly $500,000 per metric that they hit. So if an agency hits all 6 metrics, they get roughly $3 million on top of their base 5307 allocation. Bringing this up because that could be potentially a good model for our policy decision number 3, which is this performance and stability fund. We might want to kind of look at that really hard to see if we'd obviously want to modify it to be Commonwealth specific, but it does seem like a pretty good model to look at.
So question, you brought up the federal funding, just to remind us, in small urbanized areas, is FTA funding eligible for use to cover operating expenses of these transit systems?
Yeah, the operating assistance, it does not matter the area that's served, it's the number of buses. So they have a 100 bus rule, and if you are over 100 buses, I don't remember all
So
the
more
details.
importantly, for our whatever, there are 9 who are in this category, how many of them can get federal money to pay for operating?
All.
Okay, that's important. Again, just like we looked at the rurals, they can get up to 50%. These guys can get up to 50%. I guess if the money.
50-50 match. They could
50-50
technically use, if they don't have 100 buses, they can use all of their federal 5307, I believe, for operating. Their operating caps, I believe that's only for large urban agencies.
And that's even the stick money can be used for operating.
Sorry?
Even the stick money can be used
Yes.
for operating? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Just.
Yep.
Baseline.
Well, it just all goes into a big pot anyway. The sticks just added it.
Thank you.
Great question. And then just modes of service, it's the same modes of service as our rural cohort agencies. It's fixed route, demand response paratransit, and commuter bus. So standard transit modes. Okay, so some questions to consider here for small urban. What should the sizing weights for small urban public transit be? What emphasis should we place on the cost metric? Given that there are a wide variety of service models, and again, you have one unionized or two unionized, you have one turnkey operation, and then also should cost of living be considered here? I mean, you can kind of see the communities, like looking at the list of small urban agencies, you can kind of see the communities that are served. You know, Charlottesville and Williamsburg, and you got Winchester and Bristol, and Stanton. I mean, yeah, those communities are very different, but they're in the same cohort. So got to think about that. Another question is roughly half of transit agencies in this cohort serve the large universities, must have high metrics. And so how do we consider that in the weighting? I mean, just on paper, you can almost argue that these should be two separate cohorts. So you got one group at the top, and then you got one group that's a little bit further down at the bottom that are more rural in nature. So how do we consider that when we're talking about metric weights here? And then as we were looking at this and starting to think about, you know, what weights might change here, you don't have to change any of the metric weights. I mean, in small urban, you can make the case that these metrics and their associated weights are appropriate for small urban. So just because we're bringing this to you doesn't mean that we have to move away from the current sizing metric weights. And we want to remind you all of that. Noel.
Could we have different sizing metric weights for different cohorts though? Like, so if small, maybe we would use these for small urban, but we would have a different.
For rural and different for large urban? Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
That's what we want to.
Yep. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here is customize them by cohort. But again, we don't have to change it. We could determine that two of the cohorts, 50, 30, 10, 10 is appropriate. And then we only want to make a tweak for one. Like that's totally, I think, on the table for discussion. Okay.
Just to also clear, I mean, like, we've seen that small urbans, just for instance, ridership has been more percentage of maybe they do better on some of that is. These types of things, looking at, referring back to even some stuff we talked about before lunch, I guess, what their strength is, you may want to.
Yeah.
You know, ridership's better in some, coverage in others, so.
Okay, and so key observations from the final cohort, our largest cohort, large urban. Large urban agencies operate in areas with high populations, jobs, congestion. That's obvious, I believe, to everyone. Generally, agencies in this cohort have more opportunities to influence ridership increases through schedule and route changes. We've seen this happen to a number of our large urban agencies that implemented system redesign efforts to really focus on increasing ridership. And those redesign efforts have been very successful. So something to keep in mind there. These agencies tend to have high metrics compared to the rest of the Commonwealth across the board, ridership cost, hours and miles. A big point here, most agencies, I say most, not all, most agencies in this cohort have access to regional funding sources. So something to keep in mind, Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, and Richmond all have some regional transit funding. Petersburg does not in the Richmond large urban area, and Roanoke doesn't have any regional funding sources. But Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, and I guess GRTC here in Richmond does have access to those.
Capital funding.
Capital.
CBTA.
I mean, and Northern Virginia regional money is only capital if you're talking about MBTA money. There's no operating funding for that. But you guys don't have access to HR TAC.
HR TAC.
We have the HR.
You have the HR, yeah, okay.
That pays for operating.
And CBTA can.
CDC. Yep.
Yeah, we don't have any
Now,
operators.
you get region, you only get regional, right? Well, there's regional routes.
In Northern Virginia, MHA, 30% funds can be used for operating.
For transit operations.
Yeah,
Okay.
for 30%
Oh, yeah,
funds,
okay,
yeah,
thanks.
but not the
No,
70%.
good, that's we need to see that stuff on that.
Which is how we fund Oklahoma.
Not
Little
part of
city.
it.
Right, which is not part of this, but yes, they are eligible for transit operating.
Another point here, while we only had a couple unionized agencies in the small urban cohort, we have a bunch in the large urban cohort. So that, comes with potentially some cost changes there. And then getting at the modal diversity, this is really where you see all the different modes of service included. Fixed route, demand response, paratransit, commuter bus, but also BRT, light rail, and ferry. So some key questions for this large urban cohort. Again, what should be the sizing weights for large urban public transit? How do we incorporate the variety of modes provided in this cohort, given that some, like commuter bus, have high miles, while others, like light rail, have low miles, but a higher cost? So this is going to be a trade-off, and honestly, this is a really, really hard question because we're back in these like very different agencies and services, and we got to come up with one set of sizing metrics to address the entire cohort. That's going to be a kind of a key question for you all. And then the last one here, should ridership be more heavily emphasized given that there are higher populations, jobs, congestion levels? If so, then where would we pull from? And again, this has to be a 100% sizing metric. So if you're going to crank up the ridership in large urban, I'm not saying that we are, but if we do, then you have to drop the weighting of either cost, hours, or miles. Okay, so that's all up for debate. Go on.
I hate to beat a dead horse, I really do. But I know there's some systems that might have free fare. And when you're looking at ridership, that impacts ridership. So that's something I think we need to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of zero fare systems in the large urban cohort. And that doesn't really impact cost, revenue hours, or revenue miles. It's kind of neutral there, but ridership, we have seen those agencies that it went zero fare, their ridership has gone up. Yep. Great point. Okay. All right. Yep.
Before you jump into this, 2 observations. One, each of our groups had something unique. So the rurals had rural money, the small urban had stick, and then, regional money in the large areas. So I think that's interesting. And maybe within the cohort, it makes an interest, but for me, it kind of like crosses each other out because each one has something. Definitely not a technical math assessment there.
Right.
And then the other thing we were talking, you highlighted some union stuff with the new General Assembly legislation that the governor changed with some amendments that just came out, which I haven't had a chance to review. I think we're going to see that as more of an issue across the state. So that's going to impact cost regardless of the cohort, I think, with the new collective bargaining.
Any other comments, questions before we move into our interactive activity? Okay, all right. We're going to try something wild here, and we're going to do an interactive activity with you all. Dr. Smoot already has the link, and he's kind of prepped for this. So just to kind of tee it up, taking into account all of these considerations that we shared, we're going to ask that you all take a few minutes to develop what you would recommend as the metric weights by cohort. So the key question here is, what should the weights be for operating costs, ridership, hours, and miles for each cohort? So how this is going to work, you all have a printout in front of you with a QR code. Using your camera, hover over the QR code. It should take you to a Mentimeter poll. It's going to ask you your name. We're going to do this anonymously, so we're not going to share Brian's results with everyone. It's going to be an anonymous poll but we need to identify who is submitted and who hasn't. So we're not going to share anybody's individual responses. But we are going to, after everyone has submitted their responses, we're going to take a short 5 to 10 minute break. Our consultants who are online are going to tabulate and summarize all the data, hopefully pull it into the slide deck and share it with you all so that we can just have a conversation about what your desired weights are within each cohort. Does all of this make sense? And I'm also available for IT troubleshooting if you guys are having any trouble with getting to Menti. Good.
Understandable.
You
Okay.
said to put our name in, I'm sorry, Alan.
If you can put your name in, just so
You can take
so
that.
Kimley Horn knows who has submitted and who hasn't. That's the only reason why we're asking. Oh, yes. And also, thank you for the reminder, Alan. We are also going to do this activity at our cohort workshops. So for those targeted outreach efforts, we're going to do the same activity with all of the attendants.
I certainly expect they will be much more informed than I am.
And then for the audience, just to sort of note, we're having the TSDAC members do this, so you won't, we're getting their input on this piece. As just mentioned, there will be the workshops. So there will be opportunity. We do have the comment form as well that maybe you can go back to as well, Grant, that slide just while we're doing this activity right here,
Yeah.
if folks do want to weigh in with anything. Close, there we go.
Yeah, so when you have finished, we're going to go on a quick break once everybody's done. Yes, and we are going to mute the room here while we go on this break. So we will reconvene in roughly 10 minutes. Right. All right. Dr. Spook, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for confirming. Okay. So thank you for your patience. The results are officially in here. And I haven't even looked at them yet. So we're all looking at the same thing here for the first time. Okay. So rural cohort. Remember, this is currently the metrics are 50% operating cost, 30% ridership, 10% hours, 10% miles. So on average, you guys selected 40 for operating costs, so it went down by 10. Revenue miles and revenue hours both went up significantly. And ridership took a big fall from 30% down to 14%. So that's about in line with what we were thinking. You know, ridership should probably go down a little bit, less of an emphasis there. More emphasis probably needs to go into the revenue miles and revenue hours. I personally was not expecting the cost to go down as well, so that's an interesting one. Okay. All right, so next we have gotta reset this for whatever reason. Okay. All right, small urban. Oh, interesting. Okay. So about the same distribution here for small urban, actually a little bit less on cost. Oh, wait, sorry. Ridership, yes. Ridership went down slightly. Operating costs went down from 50 to 39. Right, yeah, ridership went down from 30 to 26. And then revenue hours and revenue miles both went up slightly. Okay. So, but this isn't a huge change from the current one. I guess costs went down, hours and miles relatively went up, ridership slightly down. Okay. All right, and the last one here, large urban. Okay.
Can can we go back just 1 second? So I don't know if I am curious, since we have a couple of folks in the room who are from this category, if there's any comments you wanted to make or anybody else. I'm just, since we do have a little slight adjustment of kind of just getting an idea of sort of what's behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian and I were just talking before we joined again about ridership as an element, because we do have that huge split between the college town university systems and then the other systems in there, and that ridership would be really beneficial for them, but really detrimental for some of the other agencies. And then I guess just my outlier comment in general is, how much should ridership even define the size? I mean, I think it can play a lot of part in performance, but in the sizing, I mean, your routes are the same number of hours and miles regardless of how many people are in the bus. It costs the same amount of money to run those routes regardless of how many people are on the bus. So when you're talking about the size of the system, ridership doesn't really change how big or small your system is. So.
I think you were saying that piece of it from all three categories.
Yeah,
not
I guess
just,
across all three in general, yeah. And it makes a lot of sense in performance because it's an incentive there, but from the size of your agency, do things drastically change regardless, compared to how many people are on the bus at that time?
It's a good question. I have a few thoughts on that, but yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, it's more of a hypothetical, like happy to engage in any dialogue about it.
Okay. So the last cohort here, large urban, operating cost remains the driving metric here, going down from 50 to 44. Ridership slightly went down from 30 to 24, and revenue hours and revenue miles kind of took up that difference, and they both went up slightly. So very interesting. So I guess my big takeaway here is it does look like ridership may be less of an emphasis with rural in favor of the service outputs with hours and miles. Within both of the urban cohorts, it looks like it's still following the priority of cost being the top, ridership being the second, and then hours and miles right after that, but with some variation there. Very interesting that cost went down for all three. So something to keep in mind, I should have probably mentioned this to you all before you did this exercise, but cost being the driving metric currently, when you mess with cost, that's when on the other end, once you see allocations, that's where people are going to get a lot of swings. Okay. So that's kind of been used as a proxy for stabilization. So just be aware of that, I guess, as we continue to think this through. But very interesting. Any other?
Yeah, any other thoughts that folks want to share of kind of?
Well, I think one of the questions that I've had, and I'm no intent trying to be flippant, but when we look at our rural providers, and I know I've even talked offline, is that the lifeline services that they're providing, should we even be looking at is it even to the fact that it's just looking at operating costs? And all of it, I'm going to be probably the one that threw that off. Is it sort of, if we, again, sort of working with kid gloves and being very sensitive to the data requirements, the burden of reporting, all that kind of stuff, is there something that becomes the simplest thing, which is a metric? The challenge is, of course, if they've been already allocated based on these 4 different models, and then you switch anything, it's going to change some stuff around. But I mean, I would always say hey, if we could give them each 30%, have a nice day, write a check. I know we don't have enough money to do that. I already got that confirmed. But I'm just really sensitive to the role of folks and what we're asking. It's sort of juice for the squeeze thing. Likewise, I'd say I think the middle geography one is, I think, incredibly difficult. Hearing what you're talking about with as soon as I saw that this we're talking about is university and then other small urban, and that's why STIC was created, because it's such a weird anomaly. I mean, your college town, that's awesome transit space, but people don't know obviously have the benefit of that. So, so those are sort of my two thoughts on this academic exercise for the moment.
I wonder if the drop in cost wasn't due to subconsciously thinking back on what we heard in 2025. I know I certainly took some of that into consideration when I did, but I don't know if it was on the others subconsciously.
the proposal had it
to
going
reduce the
down.
way amount.
Yeah.
And for me, I didn't touch operating costs because I knew when we did this in 2017, like operating costs drove everything.
Yeah.
Like it, because that's what we're doing. We're giving money to help pay for operations. So therefore,
Okay, any final thoughts before we move on? Dr. Smoot, anything you want to share?
Looks like you're talking, Dr. Smoot, but you're on mute. Dr. Smoot, you are on mute.
Yeah, Dr. Smoot, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. On the face of it, if you're running a business or an activity, doesn't have to be a business, you would say that the more efficient ones are the ones that have least operating cost and more customer engagement. Now, how is this, or is this any different? I mean, to me, you're rewarding inefficiency if you elevate operating, forget what the numbers are. If you elevate operating costs and you reduce use of the business, which is ridership. Now, what am I missing here? Because I think I probably am missing something.
Dan?
If you like. So again, I just want to remind you, Dr. Smoot, that we're working on sizing metrics here. And so sizing metrics set the relative share of transit provided by the service providers throughout the states. The performance adjustments that we do on top of that, or reward performance, would be a step after this. And so this is essentially coming up with a way of determining how big an agency is within its cohort, not if it's efficient or not. It's just its relative size within there.
Yeah,
Yes,
to
but
that point-
it seems to me we're rewarding bigness and not rewarding efficiency. Now, help me get through that.
And the only response I would have to that is that this is just the second step in a larger process that will also look at rewarding efficiencies. But at this point, you're essentially determining how big HRT is compared to Loudoun County, right? Two of the large urban agencies, and how they compare to one another, to essentially stratify them in that way. It's not necessarily rewarding them, it's just saying they are bigger.
And I think part of it for that, Dr. Smoot, is also you're bigger. You are important to the state in that you are carrying a large number of riders to the state. And so we are investing in that. We are acknowledging that it's not we're rewarding you for big, but it is we are acknowledging you are big. You have larger operating costs. You are carrying a significant number of the overall ride share or percentage of transit riders that we have in the state. And I think it is captured in operating costs, but I think there are additional things that come with carrying a lot of riders, right? That yes, will get reflected in operating costs, but I think it also just sort of gets reflected in other ways too, is my sense on that.
I'd say I left the operating costs where they were, 50% across all three, purely on the notion that I keep hearing about the need to be predictable and stable, and knowing that performance is a different criteria. So it's just
great.
Which I guess is why operating costs has always been our proxy, because when you think of efficiencies in the rurals, we've talked about it, they're going to have more miles and hours and they're going to have riders, but they're providing a very important service for that vulnerable population. That's not going to translate to efficiency.
Yeah.
Even though this is only sizing, but for the next part, that's a philosophical, yeah.
I like Dr. Smoot, what you said about this is kind of rewarding bigness, because that's exactly what this is. It's a sizing metric. So we are trying to determine how big each agency is within their cohort. We're not getting yet to that rewarding agencies for performance efficiencies. That's the next step here. It's literally how big is your agency, bigness.
So one thing to just say there, and then Grant, is that it's important how much weight we put on the sizing component.
Well, the sizing component,
When
back to the full-
when we're dealing with the full formula.
when you're dealing with the current formula, the sizing metric applies to all of the revenues. And then we have these performance tweaks up and down right afterwards.
Right.
What we're talking about with this concept is setting aside 5% off the top, putting that aside for performance and stability fund. Revenues get distributed between each cohort. And then the money within each cohort is applied, the sizing metric is applied to the full amount of money. Okay?
Right.
And then the 30% cap gets added on, and then leftover money spills into the performance and stability fund. So, yeah, it's just a different way of thinking about it. But essentially 95% of the revenues, like the baseline allocation, is going to come out of these sizing metrics. That's probably the best way to think about it, is like your base allocation, probably 90 to 95% of the money that you're going to get through this formula is going to come out of these sizing metrics. The rest is going to be subject to however we define performance and stability fund work.
I appreciate you saying the 95%, because when you talk about it, that we're like using all the revenue for the sizing, but we're really only using 95% of all. Because when you go back to the chart, then that shows that 5% going down to performance and anything left over from 30%, and that gets us back to the performance piece and where Dr. Smoot was going with, well, could we pick up efficiency? Theoretically simpler.
Okay. All right. If we're okay with it, I'm going to keep moving. So we stay on schedule here. So again, we want to give you guys a quick preview of these cohort workshops. That's really kind of the next phase of this whole thing, is that, this has been a great conversation with you all, but now we really have to do some outreach to our transit agencies and other stakeholders to get their thoughts on what we've discussed here. So we have identified, gosh, I didn't even put it in my notes. Alan you might have them in your notes. We have identified the actual dates for our cohort workshops. All of them will happen this month in April, later in the month. What we're going to do here is we're going to have 2 separate large urban cohort workshops, one with Northern Virginia and one with the rest of Virginia. So it's 2, and then we're going to have one for all of our small urbans and then one for all of our rural. So a total of 4 cohort workshops. We're going to probably try to do this model for May after our next TSDAC meeting as well. But these are going to be virtual meetings, and you can see the draft agenda here on the screen. We're going to kind of walk through the same stuff that we walked through with you all today, probably a little bit abbreviated. Hopefully give potentially some additional data, definitely what's in those printout sheets. We're going to run through this activity through Mentimeter. We're going to tee up our policy decision number 3, which I'm going to go through with you all here in a second. Obviously, I'll have questions and answers, next steps. Additionally, a last minute ad here based on what we heard from you all this morning around TRIP. We probably need to just do like maybe 10 minutes on TRIP at each of these cohort workshops as well, just so everybody understands the current program, get feedback on potential improvements, definitions, all that type of stuff. So, Alan, do you want to quickly update everybody on the dates?
Next slide.
Oh, is it on my next slide?
Yep, it's on your next slide. Yep.
Of course. I created an extra slide for this. I guess for those following online, if you're still looking at the PDF, this is a new slide, slide 52. We just solidified these dates yesterday. So we've got 2 on April 23rd. Those are both the large urban cohort workshops, and then 2 on April 28th. And those are the small urban and rural cohort workshops. We are going to be sending out login information and just more details about these workshops here, hopefully this week. So we start getting invitations out, and yeah, that's really the next big step of outreach and engagement as part of this effort.
and I apologize, I missed it. Is there value in us sitting in on the, sorry, and if you just said it, I
No,
apologize. I got distracted for a
and
second.
you just reminded me of a very important talking point here.
I was just about to say.
We talked about maybe not having TSDAC members sit in on these. We were worried kind of about quorum issues, but also like, I don't know.
Like, I'd love to hear, because it's like you
Yeah.
only hear from like, the folks you know when you talk to, so.
I think we're open to it. We were
No more than
concerned
two
about
is-
the more than two. That's the thing. I think we can work with you all on making sure we don't
Yeah.
violate the more than two because this is a public body. But I think if we coordinate through Grant and his team, we can make sure we don't run into issues with that, but we're open to.
I'd love to hear from not just those I always hear from.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
so far that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
If you want to attend any, just let me know and I'll kind of balance to make sure we don't have more than two.
And question, and it might be up to TSDAC more so, but like, are we going to hear? Are we going to participate?
Yeah, I would
That's
think,
very
that-
different
I would
things.
think you would not want.
No, I don't want to participate. I want to literally, I just want to be here. Like, I can literally be like,
Yeah.
off camera, off mute, off everything. I just want to hear the conversation. That's
That
all.
was my preference, but I wanted you all to
Mhm.
intentionally say that so DRPT staff know what our expectations are.
That makes sense. And this is really your participation
Oh,
form.
yeah,
The workshops is more for.
I thought that's really
else who's
important.
not at this.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So real quick, before we get into next steps, we've got 15 minutes left. So we did want to at least give you kind of a preview, I guess, of policy decision number 3. So you all can start thinking about that and how that will work. So here's another visual of where that is in the conceptual model. So, and we only have one slide on this, so not a whole lot of detail here. But policy decision number 3 is to define how that performance and stability fund will work. So as a refresher, funding provided from policy decisions number 1 and 2 will offer your base allocation for each agency. So I mentioned that earlier. And then policy decision number 3, which is this performance and stability fund, the purpose is to help address concerns about predictability while also rewarding agencies for good performance. And Dr. Smoot, this is where it gets into efficiency and effectiveness measures. This is where we could start to implement those criteria. Some key considerations, really just one kind of big one here at the bottom. We mentioned this already, but just wanted to bring it back up, that stick funding model could really be a good solution here. We probably wouldn't want 6 criteria, probably want to make it more simple. We also have some data limitations, of course. We're not going to be adding in new data, so we got to think about that. But kind of following what FTA does with the stick model is certainly something to think about.
I just want to step back because I did your math. You gave that great number of 1.1% is 1.2 million. So if we're talking about 6%, if I do my math, is that $6 million is potentially in the performance pot?
It's
Am I
variable.
doing the math
I think
wrong?
it's 5, I think it's probably.
So 5, yeah, so that would be the 5% off the top. The unknown is the 30% spillover revenues and how much money that is every year.
Oh, okay.
'Cause they
Okay.
get
So that
combined
could,
into-
okay. And the reason I say that is how much money we're working with, and is it, especially as we talk about our college towns, right? Is in how we factor those performance measures for the small urban regions, that we are mindful of then what they could get in performance, and is there enough to make that worthwhile,
Yes.
right? Again, everything all works together, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad you're thinking about this. We've been
Yeah.
thinking about it as well. The dynamics of the spillover and who's eligible for the spillover funds is going to be very critical here.
Yeah.
Because like in my mind, the small urban is really where you see this, like a lot of big, a lot of small. And Blacksburg and some of these larger agencies, depending on how things shake out with the sizing metric, they're going to probably hit their 30% cap more often than not, likely. And so the spillover money, if it goes into the big pot with the Bristols and the Winchesters that are trying to compete against Blacksburg for the sizing metric, the base allocation, are they really going to be able to compete for the performance and stability fund money? Or is it just it's their sizing metric mostly and that's pretty much it? So we got to just think about those dynamics, but also we want to reward good performance. I mean, that's in state code, right? So we have to address this, and it's a fine line to walk. We gotta be looking for all these kind of anomalies and unintended consequences. This is probably where we're gonna see those. So we gotta be very careful. Okay. Before we move into next steps, any just general other thoughts on that policy decision number 3?
I just flag, everything here is talking performance, but it does have the word stability in there.
Yes.
So I just don't want to lose that as we think about it, because it could help with those anomalies that you just commented on.
Yep. Also, remember the point that was made earlier, another way to address stability could be through using those 3-year average data and the sizing metric. So we got to see how that plays in to this as well. Yeah, very good point. Okay. Ooh. Next steps. We've got a lot of work to do between now and the next meeting. So we've kind of broken this down for action items for our TSDAC members, action items for DRPT staff. The action items for TSDAC is really to just start thinking about these key questions that we presented to you all today. And so for TRIP, how does TRIP support your agency's goals, and does existing guidance promote or discourage these? So definitely encourage you all to take a look at the current CTB policies surrounding TRIP. Also, as Evan mentioned earlier, we have the Blue Book, which is hyperlinked in the slide deck, as well as the state code language surrounding TRIP. So please take a look at all of that. And then how should DRPT define the new concepts presented in HB 200? And what are examples of projects that could be funded under these? Again, micro-mobility was a new one that got brought up. Human services, transportation gets brought up. And so there are these new concepts, and we got to define what that is. So start thinking about that. As far as merit operating goes, I mean, these are really just the questions within the sizing metric for you all to really consider, and within each cohort. So I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just kind of copy and paste from the slides from earlier, but you got a few questions for rural, a few questions from our small urban cohort, as well as a couple from our large. Like the last meeting, a handful of you all sent comments, questions directly to us. That worked very well. We were able to think them through, respond well before this meeting. So we're going to give you kind of the same deadline of April 24th. Please send questions about what was presented today to me. If you could send those to me by April 24th, that would be great, so that we have adequate time to respond to you all, set up meetings if needed, and kind of just take all of that into consideration as we head into our May meeting. And then the big action item for us on staff is we have to develop, we already did schedule, the cohort workshops. So I'm thinking that probably at the next meeting, we'll provide a summary of kind of feedback that we received at those cohort workshops. And like I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to attend. Just let me know if you do want to attend, so I can make sure we don't have more than 2 TSDAC members on each workshop call. And I think that.
Can I ask?
Yes, sure.
So I think, again, just hearkening back to the discussion at the very beginning of the meeting with the timeline, I think just to put a pin in it, the workshops and the discussion today will be really helpful for our team to kind of think about the sizing metrics, so we could come back with running some kind of early number estimates on that, right? Because again, when you get through steps 1, 2, 3 of what we're proposing, you should have kind of what your baseline would be, and then the performance stability could move you up or make you whole, right? And so I know folks are anxious to see what is that number. We still want, we want to have a good policy discussion, but I know it will not help our cause if we get you those kind of early things too late to be thinking about that. We won't promise that it may, but I think it's a good stretch goal for us of, can we get close to that or not? And certainly I think based on the May discussion, again, I think we should be able to have some of those numbers run then for the June meeting when we come back.
Sure.
So can I, oh, sorry.
Thank you for that, Director, because that was exactly where I was heading, because we're like, you're talking about the workshops, but what about our May meeting? What are we going to have the agenda to noodle on so that before people go on summer recess in June, stakeholder input. That's exactly what I was going to ask. So thank you. As you think it through, we'll need to have a meaty May meeting. Say that 10
Meaty May
times.
meeting.
Well,
Mighty meeting.
Mighty meeting.
May meeting.
And I just wondered if you could just maybe spend a minute on, again, earlier on in the meeting, we had a sense of the steps that were going to occur at each of these meetings. But there's not much time between the May meeting and the June meeting.
Right.
And there's a holiday in
line
between.
11.
That's why I think if we can, and we've got a lot between this meeting and the May meeting, including the workshop. So it really is a full court press with the SIP district meetings happening at the same time. So the small and mighty DRPT staff will be working hard. But again, I think to the extent that we can come into that May meeting for you and provide you the materials ahead of time to sort of see like generally where we might be headed with, assuming we can give you maybe, the scenario with this sizing metric, we ran numbers and kind of this is where we look at. With scenario B, this, will show us this. We're hoping through the workshops that we'll get some clear direction, maybe not on what the precise math is of the allocations between the sizing metrics, but how important are particular elements within this. I do hear the question too, which we can talk about afterwards, staff, of like, is there even more we could be simplifying in that sizing metric? So I think that's a good thing for us to chew on, even going into the workshops of like, what really, matters and do we need to hone in there versus what we can capture in other things. So I know though, if we show people wildly different allocations than they're used to getting at the end of the day, that is not what anybody wants, right? So yes, I think kind of how do we balance that between let's be pushing ourselves and working to do that simplification, but not having an outcome that's just too much of a shock to the system either at this point in time. Otherwise, I'm sure we will hear about that from folks.
You have offered to do the stakeholder meeting after May again, so.
Yeah, we will have, after the May meeting is the VTA conference, kind of follows that. And then we are planning as part of the SIP district hearings to use that to get input on both this process and also the statewide rail plan, which we're also working on. So that will be happening during that period too, to get that input. And then again, over the summer, once we kind of know, here's what we're looking at, here's what that draft analysis and sort of policy process looks like, does that seem to be on track? So thank you.
Anything else? Anybody have anything you'd like to? Not? During this meeting.